professional soccer player, and I was a presenter for the BBC, and then became a national speaker for the British Green Party. And then I had some amazing experiences, what you might term spiritual experiences. But anyway, experiences that were not the usual experiences that people have, and it basically lifted the veil from my eyes, and I started to see the world in a different, completely different way. And I started in an incredibly synchronistic journey, where I would come across information, people, situations, experiences in an extraordinarily coordinated way that was putting information in front of my face. And what I started to do was to connect the dots. And there are many, many things going on in the world, many different, quote, conspiracies, many manipulations, many engineered events, and many engineered forms of control, whether it's control of finance or control of the media, whatever. But when you connect the dots, you realize that all roads lead to a network of interbreeding families that go back to the ancient world, who call themselves the Illuminati.
Now, tell us a little bit
and the whole picture started to unfold, and I've been doing it now for 15 years full time, and you know the picture is really starting to become clear. Not least because the agenda of the Illuminati, which is a global Orwellian state, is of course in front of our eyes more and more with every passing day now. The greatest form of control, actually, is not an overt dictatorship like fascism or communism. That is a very efficient form of control for a while, but it has a major flaw, which is that the people being controlled know they're controlled. And when you know that you are controlled and who the controllers are, then you've got a chance of doing something about it. And eventually the desire for freedom will bring situations like that to an end at some point. It might take some time, but it will happen. The greatest form of control is the illusion that we're free. And that's the kind of control that they've created in what we call the democratic world. It is a few controlling events while giving the impression to the people that they are free. Now, what is this freedom? This freedom is putting a cross on a piece of paper once every 4 or 5 years, or in America, pressing some button on some electronic computer system which anyone can decide how you're going to vote. And we call that freedom. You know, people do not rebel against not being free when they think they are. You know, it's what I call in the books the prison without the bars. You know, you sit in a cell with bars around you. You know you're in a cell, but if you sit in a cell and you can't see the bars, and you think you can get up and go where you like whenever you choose. And what is happening now, Alex, and the reason that so many more people are waking up, and it had to be like this. People, you know, weren't going to wake up until more and more this Orwellian centralized fascist state was actually increasingly in our face. And what's beginning to happen as a result of all these things, changes in legislation since 9/11, which have taken away basic freedoms, imposed more and more control, more and more military involvement in law enforcement, etc., is basically we're beginning to see the bars now. And as we do, people are more and more, in ever more vast numbers, open to the fact that what people like me and others have been talking about all these years is actually reality. What people are actually saying, hey, you know, these terrorists, they're threatening our freedom. So what we have to do to meet the threat is to take our freedoms away. You know, I mean, excuse me, I mean, that's mental gymnastics on a universal scale. But there are two types of people. There are those who are genuinely so completely indoctrinated that they genuinely believe that people like Bush care about their freedom, and that you know, killing hundreds of thousands of civilians in Iraq is somehow bringing peace and love to the world. And then there's other people, which you quite rightly identify, who are basically in serious denial, because it's a collective version of when people say, "Oh, change the subject. Don't want to talk about it." Okay. In other words, they don't want to face what they instinctively know is going on, because it's just too much for them. See, the other thing is you find with journalists, and you find with people in the military, or I've met. Another aspect of this is that to accept that even the basis of what people like me are saying is true, is to accept as a journalist that they have been duped all their careers and have actually contributed to the very agenda that we're talking about.
Right.
People in the military, I know someone who's retired military, and he's in complete denial for this, and one of the key reasons for that is that he will have to accept that throughout his military career, he was serving a very different master to the one he believed he was, and a master with a very different agenda to the one he thought he was serving. So these are all mental and emotional situations that cause people to go into denial.
David, we're going to go to a real quick clip of the Illuminati just to see some of the things that you elaborate on. When we come back, we're going to get into the solution with David Icke. Keep it right here on Outside.
Where did she get her view of the world?
14 people are dead, including 3
Who will be her
children.
role models?
Never been a better time to buy.
What values will she have? Whose child is she? Yours or the network's? Take back your children. Turn off the TV.
And when you start to research the subliminals in advertising and television, what staggers you is not what they do and what's there, but the scale of it. I mean, it's like our consciousness is being hit by an explosion of this stuff, which then filter down into the conscious, and we think we're having our own thoughts when actually they're implanted thoughts done at a subliminal level.
The whole Illuminati manipulation is based on divide and rule. It's based on getting people into a perception of sides and then bringing the sides into conflict. This is how they engineer wars. This is how they're engineering the war on terror. They're creating two sides, the free world and the terrorists in the public mind, and they are seeking to bring those two polarities into conflict, because a few can only control the many if the many are divided and at war with themselves, and also if the many are manipulated to control each other. What I have done in my journey is I started off, and still do, but certainly in the first years, focusing on what I call the 5 sense manipulation, the manipulation of wars, of the banking system, of politics, etc. And then I started to realize that behind the, if you like, the human level of the Illuminati that we see, are other forces that are not actually of this world, who operate in dimensions of reality very close to this one, but can move into this one and out of this one, because the way that people are controlled to a vast extent is by limiting the information that they receive. We can only perceive possibility on the basis, overwhelmingly, of the information we have of what's possible. For instance, a few centuries ago, when people said the Earth was round for the first time, the population and the experts said that's ridiculous, it's impossible, because the people on the bottom would fall off. Now, that made sense on the limited knowledge that they were given. Once you introduce the law of gravity, however, what appeared to be ludicrous and bizarre starts to take on a very logical picture. And what they're doing symbolically all the time is keeping the law of gravity from us. In other words, information that would allow us to see the true nature of reality and the infinite nature of possibility. And so when you talk about the world being manipulated from other realms, other dimensions of existence, people go, it's impossible, it can't, no. But what is kept from us is just how little we can see. We are actually virtually blind in terms of what we can see. Of what is projected by mainstream science to exist in this universe in terms of matter, mass, and what have you, the electromagnetic spectrum is around 0.005% of what is projected to exist in this universe. What humans can actually see, what they call visible light, is a fraction of that 0.005%. In other words, when we look through our eyes, we are not seeing everything that exists in that space as we instinctively think.
Right.
We are seeing a tiny, tiny frequency range that our five senses and sight can access. And just beyond that frequency range that we can see is infinity, and entities that are manipulating us. Now, what happened then, and this is where the new book came in, Infinite Love is the Only Truth, Everything Else is Illusion, was that over the last year, I've gone to the next stage, which is, okay, we have these different dimensions of reality, and we're like transistor radios. At any point, we're tuned to a particular station, i.e. at the moment, we're tuned to this so-called physical reality, and therefore that's what we see. But there are other infinite radio stations that we can also access. And the next stage was to understand that actually this reality that we think is real and solid is actually an illusion. And when you start to realize that the physical body is also just a holographic illusion, the idea of racism is just insane. What is happening is that this knowledge of the true nature of reality is being kept from us, and the whole emphasis of society and the way it's structured and the way that we are enticed is focused on the five senses. It's about keeping us in this five-sense reality, this tiny frequency range called visible light, and convincing us from cradle to grave that this is all there is. And things around us, for instance, are solid, and we live in this solid world. Well, it's impossible. I mean, I'm looking at a so-called solid wall now, which only exists, like the rest of the reality I'm looking at, apparently around me. It only exists in my head in the form that I'm looking at. We live in what I call a holographic internet. We are tuned in to this collective reality, which only exists as we appear to see it as solid objects and what have you. In our heads. Now, this is not me smoking some weed in some darkened room. This is increasingly mainstream science. All that happens when the five senses are activated is they pass electrical signals to the brain, which then decodes them into the apparently physical solid world we see around us. And so if you look at the internet, the only place the internet exists as we perceive the internet, in websites and graphics and words, is actually on the computer screen. Everywhere else, the internet is electronic circuits and mathematical codes. It's the same with television. Television doesn't, episodes of Friends and the 10 o'clock news don't come flying over the trees to our house. You look out the window, you don't see them. No, but when the television's switched on, it starts decoding frequency broadcasts into pictures, and the only place that television exists as we perceive television is on television screen. Everywhere else, it is frequency broadcasts and electronic circuits. And the more that I've understood this, and I go into this in detail in the new book, we live in a holographic internet, and what tunes us into this collective reality is the DNA, which is a receiver-transmitter of information, and this is where the collective reality comes from.
Now, David,
you can get people to decode reality in a way that suits your agenda, And you can get them to believe that the physical body is who they are when it is just an illusory hologram, which is just there to allow consciousness to experience this reality. And so whether it's black or yellow or blue with pink spots, it's just a holographic illusion. And but if you can get people to buy the 5 sense world as the only world there is, to buy the fact that who I am is David Icke, born in Leicester in 1952, instead of infinite consciousness, which we all are, then you can start to create the sides and the polarities, black against white, Jew against Christian, that create the divide and rule. What has happened with me in this journey I've been on is, like I said earlier, I've been through these different levels of it, and the level that I'm at now and moving on with, for me, encapsulates the level we need to view this from if we're going to make a difference, because what we call the Matrix, which is an illusory world very, very much like that portrayed in the Matrix movies, it depends for its existence on polarity, because it's the world of vibration. And for something to vibrate, it needs to oscillate between two polarities. So this is the world of polarity, the world of vibration, this realm that we think is real, but is actually an illusion that exists only in our heads. And so understanding the nature of the reality we're experiencing is fundamental to changing it. You see, if we are convinced that this physical world is, quote, real, and this is the only level that you can change anything, then we're going to run around like headless chickens, expending our energy and our frustration, trying to change something that, in effect, it's like having a movie projected on a screen, and you try to change the movie by changing what's on the screen at the level of the screen itself. You can't do that. If you want to change the movie, you've got to go to the back of the theater and change what's being projected. And so this world we think is around us is actually a projection, and we need to change the nature of the projection.
Now,
and
how do we change that,
to
David?
getting caught in this.
David. Now let's talk specifically.
Well, for me, the fundamental point is to identify who we are from the point of view of who we are, and not this illusory personality that we actually identify with. And I'll give some explanation to that. This whole area of research that I'm into now, which is detailed in the new book, came about when a friend of mine, who's a cutting-edge healer, just said to me that he had written a paper years and years ago about DNA, which, as findings have shown, was well ahead of its time. And he said two things. He said that the DNA is a crystalline substance that is a receiver-transmitter of information. And secondly, that every single form of life has the same 4 DNA codes, A, C, G, and T. And the difference between a house mouse and a human body is the sequence that these codes are in. Now, what I've also, what I began to understand then is as I mentioned earlier, what tunes us into this matrix, what tunes us into the radio station of this illusory world, which we then think is real, is the DNA. It's like an antennae. And we start to identify then with the physical body and who we are, with the nature of the personality of the person we are. And the more I've understood this, even what we call thought and emotion are manifestations of the DNA. It's like a computer program. And it's funny that when I'd finished this book and it went off to be designed into book form, I came across an article, in fact a number of them, about a research project by Russian scientists who were set out with a series of experts in various disciplines to try to establish, and if you haven't come across this, wait for this, what the 90+% of DNA that science calls junk DNA, because it doesn't know what it does. People think, oh, yeah, science knows what DNA is. No, it doesn't.
Right, science knows it all.
It calls 90% of it junk DNA because it doesn't know what it does. And this research project was to try to find out what that 90% actually did. And what it concluded was that the DNA, and therefore the physical body as we perceive it, is actually a biological computer. It's a biological internet, if you like. And the reason that psychologists say they can identify or break down human personalities into about 12 archetypal personalities and combinations of them is because what they're identifying is not consciousness in the highest sense, but these computer programs that we identify with. So what I'm saying here, and if you look at any of the ancient cultures, you'll hear the same basic theme. We are not our thoughts. We are not even our emotions. They are products of this biological computer program. We are the silence between the thoughts. We are that place that people go in meditation, where the place where people go when they daydream, where their mind, the computer software chatterbox mind shuts up, and you go into the silence. Now, the reason that wherever you go, they talk about, I mean, I've got a great, great friend, Credo Mutwa, who's a Zulu shaman and the official historian of the Zulu nation, and he talks about going to the silent cave, the place of silence, where he says past, present, and future all meet at the same point. And it's a recurring theme, and the reason that it's silent, this infinite consciousness beyond the illusion, is because it's all-knowing. It doesn't have to have this constant chatterbox trying to work things out because it just knows. And we access that silence, that infinite consciousness beyond this illusory madness through our intuitive knowing, not through thought, through our intuitive knowing. Now, I know from my own experience and talking to goodness knows how many other people who've had the same experience around the world, once you move from a point of perceiving this world from the level of thought and emotion, and you go into that silence of all-knowing, you are in the world physically, yes, but you are not of it. And you start to see what you couldn't see before. Instead of being in the fog and caught in the fog and taking this reality to be, quote, real, you start to see the manipulations. You start to intuitively know that people are lying to you. You intuitively know that this explanation for 9/11 or the London bombings is a total fraud and fake. That is the place that we need to get so that we see through it without reading any of my books, without listening to radio shows like this, great as they are. You intuitively know it because you're accessing that level of all-knowing. Now, at the top level of the Illuminati, where this knowledge has been passed over through the secret society network at the highest level, only to people they want to have the knowledge, they know how this reality is created and the nature of this reality. And what they want to do, and what they've done, is structure society to hold us in the level of mind, thought, in the level of emotion, in the level of the five senses. So we don't access that infinite, all-knowing, all-loving level of consciousness that manifests itself in the silence. And when you get deeper and deeper into this, as I do in the new book, you start to realize that this assault on us through chemical additives in food, chemical additives in water, through electromagnetic frequencies, mobile phone frequencies, all these things, they have a single recurring common theme. They rewire the electrical circuitry of the brain, and they affect the DNA.
David.
And the idea is to hold us through all these different means in the five-sense level of reality, so we do not access that which we really are, which is the infinite consciousness between the thoughts and between the emotions. And when you get to that level, you don't need to be told what's going on in the world, you can see it because you are symbolically looking into the world instead of being caught in it and believing it to be real. And once we do that, then everything changes. And that's why they're desperate to keep us in the five-sense reality. And the whole of society is structured to entice and attract the five senses.
If what they tell us about who we are is not true, it's not necessarily easy inside the box definition, the reality consciousness of who we are, because to me it's like trying to describe, well, as far as Buddhism's concerned, describe enlightenment. Well, it's not really something you can describe with simple English in the box words in a holographic universe. It's something you feel, it's something you know. And when you have it and when you're at that point, when you're at one with the source, it's beyond words.
Exactly, and human words are so limited, and in many ways they're supposed to be limited. And Orwell talked in his books about, particularly 1984, about newspeak, where you replace words with new words which have less and less specific meaning, become bland and manifest themselves in what we call today political correctness.
Right.
And as he said, in this world, we think in words. When you have a thought, and this is actually an interesting point in relation to what I said a few minutes ago. We think in thought. We think in words, rather. And therefore, if you reduce, as Orwell pointed out, the number of words available and the specific nature of what they're describing, then you not only make it more and more difficult for people to articulate what they feel and what they know,
right,
you actually make it more difficult for them even to think what they know, because or think about the world as they perceive it, because they have not got, as generation follows generation, the language to even think in those terms. But if you go beyond thought into the realm of silence, into the realm of knowing, then you don't need words. I mean, you don't even know. I mean, you'll know this, Alex, and many people listening to this program will know it, and you really have to experience it to know it. You get to a state of knowing, and there are no words. You don't need them. You just know something. You don't need words to describe what you know. You just know it.
Without bringing religion into it. But I've read your last book, and there were some things I didn't quite understand. Do you see there being something that we can look up to that's not per se above us being low down here, but spirit guides, an almighty that's not a specific name, a specific religion, but a consciousness that we're connected to, being the source, that can guide us, being the term, thy will, not mine, be done?
Yeah, for me, I think we need to, one of the words I would support being eradicated from the human language is the word worship. All the time we are pressured and encouraged to look up at something. I mean, we are that consciousness. We are that infinite consciousness. Everything is that infinite consciousness expressing itself in different ways. What has happened, it's not that we have to get anywhere. We don't have to evolve to enlightenment. We are enlightened. We are infinite consciousness. We are the all-knowing. We're different expressions of it. What's happened in this illusory, quote, matrix world is that we have been manipulated to disconnect from that consciousness in terms of understanding that that's what we are. And what we believe is what we create. And psychological experiments have shown this, how what happens is information is received by the brain, the DNA, whatever you want to describe it. And what happens is, on the basis of our belief in reality, we edit that information and filter that information to fit what our indoctrinated belief. What stage hypnotists are doing is what the Illuminati are doing collectively to the human race. They are implanting a false reality which the stooges on the stage then decode into their experienced reality, which is what we're doing all the time. So when someone is given a potato and they're told to eat it, and they're told by the hypnotist that they are eating an apple, what happens is to them, they're eating an apple. Why? Because the implanted belief that they're eating an apple decodes the electrical signals coming from the taste cells to the brain, not into a potato, which is what they're actually eating, but into an apple. It just codes the way that signal is interpreted. Mm-hmm. And I tell a story in the book, which was told by a guy called Michael Talbot in a wonderful book in the early 90s called The Holographic Universe, in which a stage hypnotist, which he experienced, was brought to a party that he was attended. And one guy called Tom, when the hypnotist was about to bring him out of his trance state, he said to Tom, when I bring you out of the trance state, you're not going to be able to see your daughter. And what he did then, the hypnotist, is he put the daughter right in front of Tom, who was sitting down. So he's looking into his daughter's belly. When he brings him apparently out of the trance state, he says to Tom, can you see your daughter in the room? He can't see his daughter. She starts giggling, but he can't hear her. The hypnotist then went behind the daughter and put his hand to the small of her back and said to Tom, what am I holding? And Tom looked bemused because it was obvious to him. He said, you're holding a watch. He said, there's an inscription on the watch. Can you read it? He read the inscription. Between him and the watch was his daughter. And people would say, that's fantastic, that's impossible, but it's not. Because this world we think is around us only exists in our head, as a holographic illusion decoded from the electrical signals, etc., that the brain receives, we can edit that reality. And therefore, when the implanted belief was put in, your daughter's not in the room, what happens is that those frequency fields that represent his daughter are simply edited out by Tom's brain, and he doesn't see them.
Right.
Now, what is happening, Alex, and this is so important, is the Illuminati have created a situation in which the human race is in a hypnotic state because from cradle to grave, we are implanted with a belief in reality through the education system and the media and all this other stuff and what we bravely call science. And therefore, the human race is constantly decoding reality based on the belief in what is real. And when you start to change these indoctrinated beliefs, the way you decode reality changes, and you start to see beyond the illusion. And this is the way that we're going to get out of this, not by rushing around in the illusion trying to change it.
Right.
We need to change the way we interpret reality, and therefore reality will change. And this is the knowledge that they don't want us to have, because it's the way out of here. When you go into the silence, there is no fear. There is no fear at that level of infinite consciousness in awareness that it's infinite consciousness. The fear is a manifestation of the illusion. And fear is the four-letter word that controls the world. It's fear that's being manipulated now over the war on terror and stuff like that, the war of conquest, or war by terror, actually. It's all part of the control mechanism, because once you get people in fear, they come massively into the five-sense level of reality, because fear is a manifestation of the five-sense reality. It's one of the key emotional prisons within the biological computer program, if you like, the software we call the body, which holds us in to this five-sense reality. And so what they're trying to do all the time is keep us in a state of fear. And they're obviously very successful at it. And what I would say to people is, if, I don't want to use words like meditation. I don't meditate. I just sit quietly and daydream and go into these states. But if you do sit quietly, don't try to stop thinking, because that will just make you think more and make you think about not thinking. But just relax and
you're right.
Go into a place of silence. And what will happen is eventually, the more you do it, you'll start to hear your thoughts and feel your emotions, but you'll realize that they're not you. It's like watching a television program, or more accurately, listening to a radio show. Mm-hmm. The thoughts go past, and the emotions go past, and you start to realize from this point of silence that you've reached that, hey,
right,
then I'm not my thoughts. Where are those thoughts being generated from? They're not me. Where are these emotions coming from? They're not me. And at that point, you start to realize that, very powerfully from your own experience, that what you've been controlled by all your life, which is thought and emotion, which is the absolute controllers of human behavior. When you get into the silence beyond thought and emotion, you do get to a place of, and I've been there, I'm not saying I'm there all the time, I'm certainly not, but when I do get there, it's a place of bliss and joy and no fear that in your life up to that point, you just don't believe you could to be experienced. And you know, it is quite a simple situation that we face. Those that are controlling us to control us and to harvest our energy, which is what they're doing, they need to hold us in the five-sense reality. They need to keep us in the realm of thought and emotion, and particularly emotion. That's the big one, the big controlling force, and keep us out of the silence. We don't need a solution. We need to remove the cause of the problem, and that's we're caught in this emotion, thought level of reality. And so we need to go beyond it into the silence of knowing, all knowing, and everything will change, and everything will change for a simple reason. For the same reason that Tom couldn't see his daughter because he changed his reality, that she wasn't in the room.
Sure.
We can change the reality that we experience by changing our belief in what is real.
David?
And when we get into the realm of silence, we get into the place of all-knowing, we get into the place of love in its true sense and its infinite sense, then the reality that manifests will reflect that level of knowing, of being, of love, and this prison world of manipulation and control.
I'm Alex Jones, and you're watching Outside the Box, going where the rest of the media fears to tread since 2004.
Things are moving very, very fast now in the matter of days, not months or years.
Sure. You know, there's a countdown situation taking place. It's been speeding up since about the turn of the millennium. At about 2000, a lot of people have predicted that the Illuminati were going to initiate, their so-called New World Order in very hard, obvious terms, and then they were disappointed when that didn't happen. And they couldn't understand that. And it's because, everything has to happen at the right astrological timing. And what we're dealing with now, and it's great that you listed all of that because that's a good list and people need to be very savvy. And then behind that, behind the facade of what's happening in the social world, you have, the astrological timing. Last week, and I apologize to audience members, who are listening who have no background in astrology, I won't spend too much time on it. I just want to say anecdotally that the planet Pluto, which rules a lot of upheaval, which rules a lot of deconstruction, and which rules exposure of hidden secrets behind the scenes kinds of things, and which also rules a lot of power struggles, has moved into the sign of Capricorn, and it's going to stay there for about 13 years. Then what we do as astrologers is we take that length of time, 13, divided into three parts, for sort of convenience sake, and we notice right away that makes about approximately 4 years, three periods of 4 years. And of course, that we notice right away then that the first period of 4 years, which started this week, will take us up to 2012. So even if we just, hone in on that first 4 years, we sort of, go microscopic on that, now we can see that we've just entered a cycle which will involve a lot of financial and economic turmoil. It will involve a lot of mergers. It will involve a lot of fallouts. People have likened it to the 1929 crisis, and that's partly true. It's a little bit different because America is different. The 1929 crisis was designed because there wasn't a single, perturbance in actual economics going on at the time. There was no valid reason for the depression to have taken place. That was artificially created, that was artificially manufactured by bankers, by people in the federal bank system in order to annihilate and wipe out basically the Caucasian, Scots-Irish, heartland people in America who had built America. And so with the Depression of 1929 and the eradication and the sellout of all of those individuals, a good lot of them, where their farms and their businesses were taken away from them, that marked the death of phase one of what you might call America's destiny. And then we moved up to the sort of the era of Reagan. People can say, okay, we moved in, with the rise of the neocons and again the super involvement of America in foreign shores, is sort of a phase two. And right where we are now, right in this period where Pluto has moved in to the sign of Capricorn, leading up to 2012 specifically, we are going to be entering into phase three of the world's destiny, phase three of America's destiny, but it will be phase one of the true New World Order coming in. This thing is a process. It's not something that happens, like people thought is going to happen overnight. It happens very gradually, it happens very slowly, and it has to be in the right sidereal timing. I'm saying this because I want the audience to really understand that there's occult underpinnings, because a person like myself who's aware of these occult underpinnings sees nothing new in anything that's been happening in the last year or in the last 10 years or 50 years. What has been taking place, throughout the world for hundreds of years, encompassing world wars, encompassing the opening of the industrial age, the agricultural age, going back through the Renaissance, going back through the development of the middle classes, the rise of Protestantism, the 30 Years' War, the 100 Years' War, the rise of Christianity, all of this stuff is part of one movement, which involves the progress of what we would call technology, which of course is peaking right now. We're racing supersonically towards this sort of technological purgatory, the cyber purgatory of tomorrow, and of course we're also in a situation where America is definitely under attack. So the headlines that you're reading, what people are seeing right now, the outsourcing of jobs, the tremendous death of the heavy machinery and heavy labor in America, the sense of the endlessly open borders, which has been a problem for a long, long time, and the giving of amnesty to people who have never worked to bring America to where it is, and yet the fruits of America have been handing over to people who don't deserve it. All these things, the introduction of the Amero, the NAFTA, highway, the CAFTA coming in, and now you can add another report to that, Alex. Did you know if you go to YouTube and put in North American Union by 2010, it'll bring you to a Fox Channel report which has just exposed the fact that the American taxpayers are now going to be paying for the developments in Mexico. Excuse me, it's not Fox report, it's CNN. It's a live report, and you have to. It's a report with Lou Dobbs. Go to YouTube, put in North American Union by 2010, and it'll take you to the report that Lou Dobbs did. And it's a investigative report which uncovered documents just very recently that showed that American taxpayers are going to be fitted with a bill to even pay for development outside their borders.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
We're in a tragic situation here in which American people need to wake up and take control of this situation again, because there is a war on America. There's a war to bring that country to its knees, and to basically make the first world a third world, and the third world countries like India and China and Japan and Indonesia rising to the first world status. It's a tipping of the balances, courtesy of Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Kuhn and Loebs, and all the rest of them up there in in Washington D.C. and New York.
Well, speaking of the Rockefellers and Bill Gates, for example, the Global Seed Vault is now accepting seeds. They've been building that. Now, ironically, interesting timing of all times in history, Michael. They're ready to start loading them up with the seeds. So they're definitely looking at something in the future. We had a caller that wanted to know about the connection with Saturn, if there was any connections with Saturn that you can speak to.
Yes, there is, and it's a very important one, and that's a very good question. I said that Pluto enters into the sign of Capricorn. Of course, anyone who's familiar with astrology, and it looks like your questioner is familiar with astrology, what is the ruling planet of Capricorn? Well, ask any Capricorn sun sign person, anybody who's a Capricorn, they'll immediately tell you Saturn. So there's a huge connection. And the huge connection is basically that Pluto and Saturn are not necessarily compatible. In astrology, it's all about compatibility, pretty much like it is in physical relationships. And if Pluto was moving through a house, moving through a sign that it was compatible with, we wouldn't have too much of a problem. The effects would be kind of different. This 13-year stint of Pluto going through Capricorn, which is a house that's normally ruled by Saturn, makes that journey very antithetical. And for goodness sake, there's the proof in the pudding, isn't it? As soon as the planet moves into the sign, as soon as it approaches the cusp of the sign of Capricorn, what do we have? We have just a meltdown situation in the economy of America and so many other things, which of course could be sadly a tip of the iceberg, but nevertheless we've seen these repercussions. And Pluto will also be affecting people, in their domestic life, in their relational life, in their relationship with their children, and their relationship with authority figures at work. So it's going to cause a lot of turmoil. The positive side is this, and again, apologies for people who are not familiar with too much of the astrological jargon, but the fact is that Saturn rules certain things. Capricorn symbolizes certain things that aren't particularly healthy. It's too much of this rigidity. It's too much of this fixity. It's too much of this reliance on authority. It's too much the concept of big daddy. It's too much the concept of projection and living the world in a sensational way and allowing other people to take responsibility for your life. As I said, big daddy and all of these kinds of things. So there's a certain amount of shake-up comes in is positive. Pluto is not something negative. Pluto, the energy that Pluto represents, and this also can be translated in psychological terms, but, again, for time, we don't have time to go into that tangent. But so just speaking purely astrologically, the energy that Pluto brings is often very positive. What this is doing is it's dividing people along psychological lines. All of this trauma, all of this stuff, and remember, if people who followed my work will know that I insist that approximately, probably 85% of the trauma that you see occurring in the world is by design. It's actually meant to do that because it's meant to create a person to be autistic. It's meant to make intelligent, rational people, regress to a totally animistic, primitive, fearful, anxious state. I've mentioned this in my work time and time again. So my counter message, always to what's coming, what is happening now, what is going to be happening in the 13 years, or certainly in the countdown to 2012, is that all that is happening is meant to happen to divide people, psychologically. For those people who just cannot find their center, cannot find the still point, are so utterly, shaken by what they see externally happening because they're so outer-directed, and then the other group who legitimately understand that something, awful is happening or these things are taking place, but those people, use that as a catalyst to find their center, as Joseph Campbell said, to find your bliss and to hold on to that place. A good analogy is if you're on some sort of, ship that is just teetering in the waves, is being tempest-tossed, more likelihood you're going to hold on, isn't it? It's at that moment that you're going to grab on and hold tight to something. So sad as it is to say, you see, coming from a spiritual or psychological point of view, all of these political shenanigans that we're seeing going on, all of the conflict that we're maybe going to be experiencing, even in our domestic situation, is actually designed to shake you up enough, and this tracks back to 9/11, especially in an American context, because the 9/11 and the towers being struck with lightning is, struck with these planes is very analogous to the tarot card that we know as the tower struck with lightning, card number 16. A huge, in-your-face physical message of shake-up of that which is phallic, that which is, rigid, that which is calcified, that which is toxic, and a huge message that there needs to be a tremendous, spiritual catharsis, or that we are going through a process of catharsis in the next couple of years. And here we are in 2008, still preceding that. I've always talked in my work about the importance of the cusp point at 2006, late in 2006. Then there's another very important, transition period in 2007 and late 2007, and now is the most crucial one that really signals the major changes. And this is Pluto going into the sign of Capricorn. And the very hours, right down to the very hours that this transit is taking place, we find these, happenings. But as I said, no matter what whatever's happening in the political world or in the domestic world or the social world, people, the ones who are awakened, the ones who are going to really be, inheriting any type of a positive future, are those individuals who are going to see this as a wake-up call to them on a psychological and spiritual level. That might mean something quite painful in the interim period. That might mean letting go of a lot of falseness in your life, a lot of false masks, a lot of false people. You can guarantee on that one. a lot of people around you who are just not serving your best interests and who basically are helping to, hide your light, hide your sense of value, self-value, and so on. And so Pluto is a sort of a wake-up call. It's like a clarion call to a return to selfhood, a return to who a person really is behind the mask, behind the facade, behind the roles, And so that is what's in gear right now, you see. So it just, there's no telling who's going to matriculate, but I've got great faith in the fact that there are going to be a lot of people who are going to get with this and not just, freak out and see this all as something very traumatic.
That's a good point to make, because I think a lot of people will wake up as a result of what they see in the future and the challenges they face. Let me briefly mention a couple headlines pertaining to this crisis with China and Russia and the threat of a third world war. The U.S. threatens punitive measures against Russia. They also say there's a new arms race between Russia and the United States that may trigger Star Wars. Recently, a Russian nuclear bomber flew undetected to within 20 miles of the British coast. Meanwhile, Britain is conducting the largest World War III exercise in history, codenamed Joint Warrior. It's designed to recreate a scenario in which Britain and other sovereign nations go to war against a state-sponsored terrorist movement using a vast array of modern lethal weapons. Also, Russia and Japan are in a joint naval exercise together. We also talked about Russians and Venezuela. Russia to test launch 4 ICBMs by year's end, and also the annexation of the Arctic. They're working on that. China aims to display their military superiority with the new spacewalk. China-Pakistan to enhance military ties. A lot going on as we see. U.S. urged to bolster missile space defenses against China. And U.S. sends advanced radar systems to Israel in advance of Iran attack. And there's some new information about STRATCOM in Africa. So yeah, that's just from like the last 3 days. Do you think they are manufacturing this third world war, Michael?
Yeah, a lot of this is, this is the media spin, which is not new, and it is, is continually to create an ambiance of fear. That doesn't mean, of course, that these people within the industrial military complex don't play war games. And they don't do these, they need money, right? They want to justify their gigantic budgets. They always think that there's some enemy around the corner. But those people who come from the world I come from, the ones who study what goes on behind the scenes, a little bit more of the conspiratorial aspect, always come across the same information, the same evidence that shows that if there's an enemy out there, that enemy has been manufactured. It is not a legitimate enemy. What we're dealing with here is a geopolitical, sort of game. And, of course, this is very difficult for people to swallow because, again, the traumatized mind is the furthest mind from being able to see reality. That's why my always message is to stop being traumatized, to not let yourself be traumatized so that at least you have a chance of seeing something that, you may not be seeing when you're frightened out of your wits. So what we're seeing here, and this can be corroborated, the very rise of Russia from the time of the Bolsheviks was an experiment created from New York and from London. In fact, the leading Bolsheviks who created the Bolshevik Revolution and who set up the whole Soviet, system over there, were sent out of the Bronx in New York, and were funded by American and British money. So there's a perfect example. And my God, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. When you talk about these manufactured enemies, the real enemy is the human race. Over here, you've got the illumined ones, and then over here, you've got the rest of us. So when you start to see that all these other conflicts, and that doesn't mean that they don't involve bloodshed and all of that, of course they do, but these are things that are orchestrated by psychopaths who don't worry about a bit of bloodshed. In fact, they thrive on it. The point being that all this stuff in the headlines, all this stuff that comes out of the media run by these Knights Templars, Knights of Malta, Teutonic Knights, individuals who are like, sunken in, totally involved with secret orders, secret fraternities. It's not even very hard to prove that because from Henry Luce all the way to Conrad Black and so many others, they're involved with these secret societies that know exactly how to play the game, and they don't want you to know that behind the lodge doors, Protestant and Catholic, Jewish and Muslim, right? Different forms of these conflicts that exist in the world, or let's say Democrat and Republican, Labor and Conservative, mean nothing. Zero. Nothing. In fact, this can be proven by the fact you just need to look at a list of who the Knights of Malta allow to be initiated into their order. And you will find that it's from extreme left, so-called lefties, case in point is Nelson Mandela, all the way up to, guess who? Hermann Göring, Reich Marshal of the Nazi Party, Benito Mussolini, right, the head fascist dictator of Italy, so forth and so on. So you'd have to ask a question, wouldn't you? My God, what this is a great order to belong to, because they don't seem to vet their members in the slightest between, from the furthest part of the extremes of the political spectrum. And then you'd ask a further question, say for instance for a moment that you came from the main, from the street and you were a layman and you didn't know anything about these orders, but you did find out what I've just told you. Well, then wouldn't you want to tap somebody like Nelson Mandela on the shoulder and go, hey, buddy, why are you even attracted to be initiated into an organization, you being a lefty after all? Why would you be wanting to be even accepted? Why would you apply for, why would you receive an award from a group that its historical figures are the world's leading fascists? Ambassadors to Nazi Germany, leading figures of Nazi Germany, leading members of the Ustashi over there in Croatia, and all these sort of henchmen throughout the world are members of. What on earth are you going over there to take their awards for? Of course, answer comes there none, because they have their insider smiles. They're laughing their damn heads off, knowing that, well, that's because you don't understand what's going on, and that I'm no lefty any more than they're any more right-wing. This is a game. This is a game we play in the camera, made for TV, made for media, but behind the large doors, we go home to receive our, pats on the back for services rendered from these organizations from which we work. And that goes from the top members of royalty. That is the same fact of the matter for the senior members of the dynastic concerns in Europe. It goes for the venture capitalists who funded pretty much every corporation of standing in America. It goes for the heads of the Russell Trust, who pretty much own America. It goes for the Skull and Bones, people in Yale University and the Bohemian societies. And it goes for all the other little menials that they have employed in the banks, in the credit unions, in the schools, in the judiciary, in the medical field, in the publishing field, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the way down to your Oprah Winfrey's and all the way down to the talking heads that you see on TV every night. And if they're not in those organizations, they want to be. They're either trying to get into these secret societies and matriculate by doing what they're told, or they're whimpering and crying because they haven't yet been able to matriculate into it. And any good journalist, I'm talking to the choir, you know this as well as I do, any mainstream good journalist that stands up against this mess, people like the old Morton Downey, and people like that, they're canceled. Their shows are wiped out. You're never going to see them again. And they are easily to replace, on the media with the talking heads. And what is their job? These are people who serve the highest ministers on the pyramid. And their job is merely one job, and that is to continually pump out not only disinformation to us, so that we have no clue about what history really is, and more importantly, is to keep on injecting trauma, wars, rumors of wars, you see, until a person is so frightened, so paralyzed with fear, that he loses his center and becomes psychologically putty in their hands to be manipulated. People don't go and pick up Gore Vidal's books. People don't go and pick up the book Death by Government to find out that governments have killed more people in their own lands, right, than they've ever killed foreign enemies. So all these wars and rumors of wars, oh my God, what's going to happen in Iraq tomorrow? Oh my God, what's going to happen in Iran tomorrow? Go and find out the facts that governments killed on record throughout the histories. It's been written about. Whatever they're doing in foreign shores, they do at home first or eventually. And we are the enemy. We are the enemy.
Michael,
We got a global village. You've read those headlines. Global village is what is coming down on us. The scared, frightened, toxic individual is going to then be screaming out to Big Brother, you see, to hand them this number so they can be stamped, indexed, cataloged, and safe in the global village. That's what's coming down. And the price over people's head is if you don't accept this, then we'll devastate your country. We'll make you a third world country. This is the sword of Damocles, the carrot and the stick approach that has worked for centuries to such great effect.
Yeah, we'll be the new Africa. Michael, a lot of people go, I don't understand this whole system and what you're saying. Surely it's just about money, but it seems to be about something even larger than that. Can you speak to the psychology of this New World Order and where you see the New World Order coming from historically from your research?
Well, the first part of the question I can certainly answer, and that is that it's not about money as you get further up the pyramid, because the people in control, the true power brokers, the true sort of cadre, the all-seeing ones at the very top of the penthouse, they've been billionaires from the time, of the first centuries AD. I mean, there's no shortage of money in these people's banks. They own all the mineral rights. I mean, just like the British royal family own all the quartz crystal mines in the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they own all the concerns of money. Their henchmen run De Beers, run the Oppenheimer Trusts, run Bayer Corporation. You see, any corporation that's been around for more than 50, 100 years is in their pocket already. This white market, so-called stock exchanges, so-called, Wall Streets and so on, is just a white market casino to make you believe in these rags to riches stories, like, an ordinary guy like you or I, can do well, and a corporation, a little company can, make it on the white market and so on. But anyone who studied history or studied politics or economics for 5 minutes knows that that white market, little Fortune 500 lie up there, has no meaning at all. It's the black market, which is not what people think. It's not just guys selling drugs on the corner. It's a huge international, cartel that stretches from Odessa to Dubai and into America, you see, and all over the place. This huge black market is where the money really is and where all of the corruption really is. But that's where the big cash is, and that's where the great diamond merchants and gold bullion merchants and white slavery and drugs, you see, is all part of. We're never taught about this black market, and we just made to look like lone assassins, lone cartels pushing drugs. We're not shown the entire network, you see, of all of this chicanery that's been going on. But getting back to what you're saying, and I want to bring up a very important point about, again, to prime people for what's going to be happening in the next couple of years, and what's happening now, is that, you see, again, these people who sit on the sort of a higher level, they're untouched by all of this. Money is not their concern. Oil is not their concern. Not even so much territory is their concern. But these individuals are sort of like heads in a jar. They need the arms and the legs of the ordinary, Rumsfelds and Obamas and McCains and Cheneys and Bushes and Thatchers and Heaths. And now we got Gordon Brown and we got Blair. You see, all these potentates that we see in the media are their sort of lieutenants. And every so often, every 15, 20, 30 years or so, these lieutenants need to be fed. It's like throwing buns to the bear. It's like time to feed the lizards. We got to feed the reptiles, because they want a kickback for services rendered. And many of these people, when they're in public office, and that could be for periods of 4 to 8 years, they can't really take the kickbacks when they're involved in public office. But after about 10 to 15 years, you see, they want a chunk. And there's only one cake that they can eat off, and that's called the world. So when you see a lot of this, taking down of Iraq and taking down of Iran, and there is the question of oil and the question of territory, never forget that it's only for these lower minions, these lower sub-dynastic concerns, these lower oligarchs with a small o, but they have run around and they've run the shop for the higher concerns, right? So these involve MEPs. It involves, these party people in the Labours and Conservative, and as we said, behind closed doors, behind the large doors, none of these divisions mean a thing at all, and this can be proven. In American context, it certainly means the people in the Senate, because 100% of those people are corrupt. And the judiciary, you see, and all across the board, right down to the police chiefs and mayors and the media tycoons and all of this, these people want something for their services rendered. And and of course Big Brother wants to feed the dogs, because you don't want these people to become disgruntled and start blowing the whistle. And secondly, these elites have kept records of these families, because isn't it going to be the sons and daughters of these families that continue down the years to serve the higher echelon? So it's very good to feed the doggy, feed the puppy now, because feed the vulture, because it's going to get a little bit antsy if you don't. And secondly, we want its ugly offspring, its filthy spawn, to serve us down the line, you see, down the future. And you do that, the smart way to do that is to make sure that, these people are well and taken care of. And you see many movies dealing with this, especially, I think it's Damien 3, the Omen 3, has some really horrible aspects, stupid aspects of that movie, but there's also some very brilliant aspects of that movie. And if you go and watch that movie again, you'll see this whole payment process of how one group, one tier, funds and looks after the other, and yes, it is about money, and it is about oil, and it is about territory, and it is about privilege on that level. To the sick, conformist, pedophiliac, often, just basically corrupt lower mafia. So right now, what you're seeing in the world is that the New World Order is being birthed. It actually may not actually kick in until after 2012, but in the countdown process, what you're seeing now is a rise in local corruption. You're seeing a vulture hunt now. It's perfectly explained if you get the movie that Sam Peckinpah did. It's called The Wild Bunch. In the first, I think, 20 minutes of that movie, you get exactly what I'm talking about, where the bounty hunters are literally digging bullets out of the corpses to compare them one another to prove this is mine, so his boots is mine, his gold teeth is mine, his leather jacket belongs to me, and keep your damn hands off because, and if you don't believe me, I'll dig out the bullets to prove you it was my gun that shot him. And so this unbelievable, dance macabre is taking place in which they can all sense the blood. They can smell the blood. The vultures can smell the blood. They can smell the death of America. And see, once that frenzy, that shark frenzy begins, you start getting these headlines. Some of them are legit, some of them are not. But, far more than just those headlines, you're dealing with a massive kill. And a great, creature like America does not fall, right away. And it's one hell of a spectacle when it falls. And so these little maggots, these little filthy rats that have been plotting America's death since the beginning, and who finally, during the period of, one can argue about that, but I would say certainly by the time of Roosevelt, this is Franklin Roosevelt, and certainly by the time of, the names are so pernicious I can barely bring them out, barely speak them, but by the time of Woodrow Wilson, you see, and Truman, and these kinds of monsters, you're starting to see the decline taking place with the Bretton Woods Agreement, and the League of Nations, you see, and the New Deal, and all these new covenants, and the bombing of Hiroshima, and Nagasaki, and all the rest of it. All of these kinds of things, it begins then. It begins then, the slow decline, and the destruction coming through the Depression, the rise of the federal government, the rise of the Federal Reserve, and the death of, like I said, the heartland, white Anglo-Saxon people of America who built the bloody country. They had to be eradicated, because on the back of those people, you can't bring in Phase 2. It's not possible to bring in the Phase 2, you see, of open borders and unlimited outsourcing, and basically the death of the middle class, cannot be brought in if the original project, the original experiment was to continue. So this is what we have to be aware of, is now that there's a licking of the lips every time one of these great transition points take place, and after the vulture is gorged, after the vampire is, gorged, there's a merrymaking. And these people have hidden behind the gates, they've hidden behind the veils, and despite the fantastic work of the Eustace Mullinses and the G. Edward Griffins, and despite the whistleblowing from senators and from even governors and from police chiefs and from military generals, this is the work I've collected all my life. We have the proof, we have the evidence. From clergymen, even you see, who worked on this to expose these corruptions within the financial institutions and whatnot. All of these people are closing ranks now. And this is how you, again, gut. This is how you, vampirize. This is how you eviscerate the country. And this is what we're heading towards, so that when the New World Order finally comes in, and it's many threads coming together, but what happens now is the sharks can smell the blood, and they all are so hungry for a piece of the world pie, you see. So this is what is happening now. It's time to feed the sharks,
Michael, I want to go over briefly what you think is going to happen in the years running up to 2012 and what you think 2012 is all about. But before we do that, there's this other equation that I have a big question mark in my head, and many others, as to why all the obsession with genetic mutation, manipulation, DNA ownership, eugenics, the modernization, the changing the ownership even of life itself. Where do you think that quest is deriving from?
Well, this is an excellent question, and we have a DVD coming out very shortly called Architects of Control, and the title of it's actually a series, and the first DVD in that series, it's a documentary film, and it's called The Future of Mankind. It's called Mass Control and the Future of Mankind. It's dedicated to people like Jim Keith. It's dedicated to people like Ezra Pound. Again, these great researchers in America who tried to warn what was going on. And our main focus there, we try to deal with many subjects to answer that question about what's happening in the countdown to 2012 and beyond. But the main theme that interests me in that is that this technology that you're talking about, and this whole idea of the genetics, the genetic manipulation that I believe is very age-old, but is again coming to the fore. And more importantly, why is it that all these genetic companies and all of these people who are the big heads, the big brains, sort of promoting all of this, why are they constantly using symbolism from these same secret societies we mentioned a few minutes ago? What's going on here? That the first genetic experiments were done in the Templar, areas of Scotland, and all the way down to the logos, all the way down to this weird cryptic symbolism that is involved in the experiments themselves, right into the whole mystical question of what is DNA anyway. Coming out of the school of people like Bruce Lipton, to even question, are we even being given a legitimate understanding of what genetics is, or are we being lied to on that level, you see? Very important question. But more importantly is this spiraling down to what these highbrow scientist technotronic types, these cyber pundits are telling us, is of course we're hurtling towards what? A utopia. But you see, unfortunately, the word utopia, which has been used by Francis Bacon and is now being promised to us, this sort of cyber utopia that we're all meant to just upload into and plug right into, is it going to be that? Because the word utopia, the etymology is interesting. It actually means no place. And of course, this might be then a subtextual message to say, yeah, it is no place. What we're dealing with here now is the organic computer. What we're dealing with here now is the organic brain. They may put that before us as some sort of global brain, as some sort of marvelous utopian concept tying into the global village, in which is endless safety, endless security, a virtual reality space in which all your fantasies can be met. And of course, believe me, the people who are disengaged from their own selfhood, which we discussed a little bit earlier, we may be lining up for this. So absolutely, there has already been manipulation of our genetics in the past. This is what my first book on Atlantis goes into. A very controversial book that looks at the original, that man, all of us, may be having part alien, part human DNA. There's even evidence coming out almost every month that sort of corroborates this, that there's something bizarre about happening with the DNA. That book also looked into the origins of evil. But in a modern context, my God, people are starving in the streets, as you said. People are walking around without a home, without a shelter. People are living in their vans. Middle class people are now having to live in tent cities. And yet billions upon billions are being put into this, technological research. Huge amount of money, huge amount of stuff going on. I mean, let's not even talk about America's problems could be solved if America just stopped funding places like Israel. I mean, that's a 2-hour show right there. But let's, back up and just say, okay, wait a minute, what about all the funding that's going into all this technical stuff? What is going on here? You know what I mean? They've scaled back on the Star Wars to a certain extent. They've scaled back on the moon projects, and that's suspicious to say the least. But now we have all of this genetic stuff. First it was nuclear war, first it was atomic war, first it was Cold Wars that they frightened us with, you see. And now the whole thing has shifted overnight, and now we're into a totally different kind of nuclear, biological, atomic setup. We're into nanotechnologies. We're into virtual realities, We're into robotics and cybernetics. And you just wonder, my God, where did the money come for all of this? Aren't there better, more important concerns? Mm-hmm. So my focus is on the psychology of that. Why is it that this is coming about? Because in all my work, I look at consciousness. I look at all the stuff that's happening to us in the theater of the world. Is there something we're doing in our thinking that brings it about? Is it just external stuff that happens in the theater of the world, and then we're sort of passive? Or are we, on some primal, primitive, psychological level, you see, bringing about these conflicts? Is this because we're divorced from center? And is this because we're not owning our own emotions, and owning our own sort of selfhood? And one component of that is that if in fact that is the case, and if man is getting more and more toxic every day, and the only cures for his problem are merely gimmick cures which make the problem worse, i.e. New Age movement and religion, and if man just keeps on spiraling further down into psychopathy, into spiritual toxicity, and this was predicted by Freud, by Jung, by Goethe, by Tennyson, by Crowley, by so many other people who have spoken about this. They've warned, John Keats warned about it. There hasn't been a figure of importance philosophically. Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, all of these people warned society that this was going to happen. Kierkegaard, back in the 18th century, my God, was talking about the death of the self, and man being a stranger to himself, and man living on the surface of himself. So are we actually getting ready for this technological, purgatory, this super post-human, what's now being called the post-human world, in which we're just dying to end our humanity? And that what we're going to encounter after 2012 is not the end of nature or the cosmos. Of course, that's preposterous. And it's not the end, perhaps, even of the planet Earth. But it is certainly the end of all that constitutes humanness as we know it. And anyone with the eyes to see even needs to look out the window today, and you can see that what we call humanness absolutely eroding away. It's been doing that even from the 70s, 80s. It was a slow process. Probably people didn't see it back then. But anyone, with even the lowest IQ could probably see it happening now.
Right.
Everything that we can constitute the human quality of a human being is pretty much almost like hard to find. What you're seeing now walking in the streets, I wouldn't qualify as human. I don't know about you.
Yeah, it feels very robotic. And I want to ask, we're talking about some really dark stuff. Is it possible that we're also growing consciously, though? Because I do see an explosion in that area that seems to be this counterbalance to the darkness that's been unleashed upon the earth. So how do you see that, the concept of consciousness expanding and us becoming closer to source as we move further to 2012?
Well, you see, in order to have correct spiritual development, and this is particularly a strong message that America needs to listen, because America has fallen short of what I'm going to say, and that is that spiritual development is not just purely anabolic, meaning that it's not always about acquiring and being in an acquisitive mode, because really that's no better than materialism. The man who wants the beautiful wife, the swimming pool, the Mercedes car, and a good job, and a yacht, and holidays in the Bahamas, we look at that person as a preposterous narcissist, a materialist, whatever. In the spiritual sense, a lot of what we're doing is very much the same. We're still in a very masculine, acquisitive mode. We're not in good relationship to ourselves. We're not in good relationship to our children. We have very little connection, spurious connection to nature. We have a spurious connection to animals, and most importantly, and as I brought this up in the talk I did in Los Angeles, which again was called 2012, The Future of Mankind, and I mentioned this at the end, when we were having the questions and answers, we are very much out of touch with what I would call the inanimate, which is actually ultimately a misnomer, because there is no such thing as inanimate. There's nothing dead in the universe. But what we would call the inanimate around us, the light, the ocean, the trees, the wind, the changing of the seasons, all of these things that man has become totally divorced for. And this pushes man to the surface of himself. And all his spiritual aspirations tend to be quite masculine, acquisitive, and what would be called yang. They're not yin, they're yang. So this is passed for spiritual attainment. In fact, we even call it attainment, getting the light, going to God, having, getting, wanting, needing. Hey, God, I'm empty, fill me. This kind of is what is passed for spiritual life. It happens in our relationships. I'm empty, I need you, you're empty, you need me. Great, we call it relationship. But in true spiritual teachings, in Taoism, in Zen, the understanding is that there's also a catabolic action, which is astrologically, incidentally, represented by Pluto. This is why this is so fascinating, because I agree with you, there is going to be an awakening. There is a greater magic underneath the sorcery. But first we've got to get clear on what constitutes true spiritual development. True spiritual development is not just going like into the gym and pumping iron till it hurts. That's good for a gym. That's not good for spiritual development. And anybody who really knows about spirituality, anyone who's really studied martial arts, anyone who's really studied Taoism or Zen gets around this. Anybody who's really studied the philosophies of Bruce Lee and Krishnamurti, you see, will get a handle on what I'm talking about. and that is it's catabolic. In order to ascend, you need to remove the dead weight from your life. In order to help that hot air balloon go up, you've got to remove the chains or remove any impediments that stand in its way. This requires a different kind of thinking, a catabolic, deconstructive type of thinking that Americans are not used to. Because, and it's nothing bad, I'm just saying that now America had the cycle. We've been through the cycle of acquisition, of believing in Big Daddy and thinking every guru with crossed leg, burning some incense and put up an ashram, he's going to give you something that you can only bring from inside yourself. I think now the mist is clearing, the incense is clearing. There's been so much abuse from these goons anyway. I'm thinking hopefully, finally now, this hippy-dippy, ashram hugging, sitting under the mushroom, fake pseudo-shamanistic nonsense is passing away, and people can stand up on their own two legs and go, I am my own priest, I am my own priestess, I don't require any other teacher. Those people are only signposts anyway. I need to start taking responsibility for myself and walking the path. And part of that path is, yes, attaining, but also it's catharsis, it's letting go, it's deconstruction, it's abstinence. And there's a lot that needs to be let go. And as I say, America and most of the West has not been very good with this. So this yin approach, this understanding that there is a building up and there's a breaking down. There's a Shiva and there is a Shakti. There's a Nagwal and there's a Tonal. There is a yin and there is a yang. There's a prolific and there's a devouring, you see. Depends what school you're coming from, but the rhetoric is there, the information is there. There's this two-way street. And it's not just grabbing, owning, having, wanting, desiring, and begging some external force for what you don't have inside. The world is never going to turn you on. The world is never going to give you meaning. I mean, it does when you're a teenager and, you're tuned into the stimuli of the world. But you see, ultimately, meaning does not come from the world to you. Meaning comes from within yourself to the world. Now, we're surrounded by people who have not, cannot, and never will be able to give meaning to the world that they're living in. Face the facts. That's just the way it is. Too bad. But we have another group of people who can, in fact, when they get, savvy to this, start realizing this. And that it is not endless experiences that need to be fresh and new. It is the mind of the experiencer that needs to be fresh and new. It's not enlightenment in a sense of luminescence. It is enlightenment in a sense of lightness, like that hot air balloon, like the Fool card in the tarot.
In other words, Michael,
right? There's different kinds of lightness. There's different kinds of attainment. And so it's not about you trying to grab on to the mystery and hug it. It's more about allowing that mystery to embrace you. But that requires you to be very feminine. That requires you to change your mode of thinking and attitude and behavior. It means that you've got to let go of your fears. It means you've got to let go of the need and the desire. See, it's like, I give a metaphor sometimes of a person who's in a boat, like, Goofy, like the Disney character Goofy, rowing and rowing and rowing and rowing and rowing on this river. He's trying to go upstream, and all the time the great river is taking him exactly where he needs to go. So the idea of spirituality that's been loose in the world from pretty much the 1960s and before, and you could even track this right back to the beginning of all Orthodox religion, is Anthony Robbins' pump it till it hurts. And I'm hoping that people now realize that works, in a material sphere, or works in bodybuilding or whatever. It certainly has no total validity in spiritual development. It's totally about throwing away the oars. What the message of the next 4 years to those who are going to become light, and that's to say, not necessarily in a luminescent way, but in a way that is to do with weight, spiritually, emotionally, morally light, which is true enlightenment, by the way. And let the river carry you. Well, you can't do that while you got the oars and you're going around like this Goofy, rowing and rowing and rowing. The spiritual essence, the Zen way, is to throw away the oars. And, of course, that is very difficult for those aggressive, acquisitive, sadistic, self-sadistic, masochistic, and basically lost and confused people. They are not able to do that because they're in their ego, and the ego is the boat, the ego is the oars, and they feel that they know where their direction is. And that's okay. Let them do it. We don't have the right to go and try and seize those oars from those people. We don't have the right to go and interfere with them in any way whatsoever. If that's what they want to do, and they want to stay in those whirlpools, if that is their choice, that's what they need to do. But the rest of us can understand, wait a minute, the great river.
Michael, we're about out of time.
It's going to take
Michael, we're about out of time in about 2 minutes' time. And what you were going into was very, very interesting, and it needs to be talked about more. It's less adding more stuff onto ourselves to make us whole, but the chipping away at what needs to be removed so we can be light. And so that's a real clear way of articulating that. But in the last minute and a half that we have, what would you like to leave us with? I understand that anything can happen now at any time. Things are moving very, very fast, and we need to the best of our ability, not panic and not be afraid.
Exactly. You basically put it into a nutshell. Is throw away the oars. Keep on researching what's going on. Keep on discovering. Have a healthy interest in humanity and what's happening to humanity. And in this great, conflict between the forces of light and darkness, or I call it sorcery against the magic, observe it. Be involved in it. Feel deeply for it. Feel deeply for it philosophically. Be there. Be in the world and understand what is going on. But rather than see it as something that's a nightmare, see it as something that's more of an adventure. You're meant to be here. Everyone who's here on this planet at this time is meant to be here for a reason. And it is a conflict between magic and sorcery, and we are being, what's happening now is a sort of a situation in which we're getting to choose whether we choose that sorcery, and we want to be possessed by that, or we want to be possessed, by the magic, the deeper and the higher magic that exists, in which these sorcerers have no knowledge of and they can never touch in their lives. That is what is really going on. That's what's behind all of this stuff that's happening in the, in the economic and social sphere. We're bringing it into being because there's incredible inner changes taking place on the deepest level, both genetics, as you said earlier, and also psychologically, because basically they're the same thing. Genetics is just an expression of our thinking, of our psychology. The changes are in consciousness, Alex, not in politics.
I want to thank you for coming on the show tonight. I realize it's 4 a.m. in your time, is it not?
It certainly is. It certainly is, yeah.
Well, as you can tell from the intro, it's a crazy, crazy world, but I don't have to tell you that. You've made a number of films. Give us an overview into just what you talk about in some of these films. One of them we played a couple portions of a couple weeks ago. It was Spirit World.
Yeah, well, there is a segment in my film Spirit World. I'm actually making Spirit World 2 now. My first Spirit World film came out last year, and there's a part of that film that discusses the changes, the weather catastrophes which we're seeing right now. And it also discusses the fact that many ancient cultures believed that the planet, the actual planet itself, is a super living organism, and that the pollution which we see happening is actually being contrived by these sort of ancient families that control the world economic system in order to kill or at least dull down the actual spirit of the planet.
I think there's a shift in consciousness taking place right now, Chris, and a lot of the knowledge that has been hidden previously seems to be re-emerging, exposed in the light of day, where previously we had no idea that these families existed in the past because, of course, they controlled the educational school system. Well, today they do, but we have this information highway at our fingertips. But I'm wondering now, with all this disclosure of information, what we're really facing and what's really going on in light of these new challenges with the Earth changes.
Well, just before we went on air, I mentioned the Kogi Indians to you. The Kogi Indians are an entire nation, but the nation is unrecognized by the government of Colombia. They're unrecognized by the United Nations. The Kogi Indians are based just north of the Santa Marta Mountains in Colombia. They're not that far from Bogota. And, this is an ancient society, and they teach that the oil, the actual crude oil, is rather like the crude oil flows around the planet the same as blood flows around a human body. And the crude oil lubricates the tectonic plates on planet Earth. And perhaps one of the reasons why we're getting, so many earthquakes at the moment is because there are vast amounts of oil that have been taken out of the planet, and obviously the planet was never designed to have billions of barrels of oil taken out of it every week. And so that's just one aspect of ancient knowledge, which, these ancient cultures in the Americas were, we must remember that the United States of America was founded on the genocide of ancient nations such as the Kogi, the Blackfoot, the Hopi, the Cree. All of these people had a version of natural earth science which they studied and was part and parcel of their actual indigenous American Indian culture. And the United States of America was formed by Freemasons, mostly Freemasons, people that came from the European elite. And the USA was formed, after a bloodbath of these people. And of course, they killed those indigenous people, but they also deliberately suppressed and killed the information that those ancient nations used to have in their oral traditions.
For example, their calendars.
Yes, calendars, that's true. There were many different types of calendars. Most famous one was the Mayan calendar. And the Mayans were great astronomers, great astrologers. And if you see Mel Gibson's film Apocalypto, you can see that the royal elite, traditionally in history, especially with the Mayan culture, the royal elite have always been sky watchers. They've always been people that have kept information about the cosmos, about the cycle of planets, about the cycle of eclipses, especially, as a secret for the elite. And in Apocalypto, you see the Mayan royal elite who mapped, actually, the sequence of eclipses, hundreds of years in the future. And you see them use this information and this knowledge and integrate this knowledge of eclipses into their rituals, and use that to impress the crowds and the lesser educated members of Mayan society.
It's very interesting, Chris, because in our own society here, it appears that the governments are preparing to deal with something around the time period of 2012. If you look at their actions and the exercises and these preparations for a catastrophic reality, it's strange because we're also coming up on the Mayan calendar of 2012, something that's reaching its way to more and more people. The fact that a calendar does exist that ends at 2012. More people are beginning to ask themselves what it really means.
Yeah, that's right. Well, there has been in the European calendar, in the Roman European calendar which we use, there is, what people refer to as a lot of slippage. And it's not really just 2012. It's really from 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. It's that period, which is not only highlighted in the Mayan calendar, but it's also highlighted in some other ancient texts. For example, the Oracle of Sibyl in Greece spoke about this exact same period as being a period of tribulation, a period of upheavals. There are apocryphal scripts as well that were discovered in the 1940s that date back from the early century, the first and second century of Christianity, that also refer to this period. It's for sure a situation where what I believe is happening. You see, the word apocalypse just means a revealing of knowledge. Apocalypse does not necessarily mean complete and utter meltdown and war and catastrophe. And it should be remembered that the world's most popular and accurate psychic from the medieval era was Dr. Nostradamus, who lived in just 5 minutes away from where I live now. And he foresaw a vision of the Earth that continued until the year 3745. And I don't believe that we're on an imminent, complete, utter meltdown. What I do think is happening is that there's more and more people coming into the knowledge of how the European aristocratic families, since the time of the Roman Empire and just before then, have manipulated politics from behind the scenes using a whole network of secret societies and cults, such as the Skull and Bones at Yale, the Bavarian Illuminati. Before then, we had the Spanish Illuminati called the Alumbrados, and the Vatican. And what I see is now millions, literally millions of people are beginning to realize that what you see on the television, what you listen to for the most part on the radio, is all influenced and manipulated by these powerful individual families. And that for me is, see, apocalypse means a revealing of knowledge. And 10 years ago, I used to mention the Illuminati to people, and they never used to know anything about it. But now, nearly everyone knows about and accepts that people like the Clintons, the British royal family, the Dutch royal family, the what I call the royal political elite, are all actually members of, these secret societies that influence politics from behind the scenes.
And it's funny, their trademark logos, or some have called them the gang signs, have been consistent over the course of hundreds of years, sometimes thousands of years, from the Roman fasci to the fasci that sits in the United States today, also a symbol borrowed by Adolf Hitler. And we have a graphic of that as well under the fasci category. It was also in our dimes in the 1950s. Next to that, we have other symbols like the torch. We have Adolf Hitler in 1936 running around the torch for the first time. Before, it was just a symbol of something, the eternal flame, used in the Olympics. And then all of a sudden, we have the torch being ran around in Nazi Germany in 1936 along with the rings. And here it stands today, still being run around the country. Today by who? China. I find it all, Chris, to be just a wee bit sickly ironic.
Yeah, I mean, those symbols, you're absolutely correct. They date back to the Roman Empire and before. And in actual fact, if you go to Washington, D.C., you can see architectural buildings which have more or less been copied from famous buildings in the Roman Empire. And also there are Egyptian influences in the architectural layout of Washington. And in my film, The Antichrist Conspiracy, all my Illuminati films are available for IlluminatiDVD.com. There's actually a micro website for each of my films there. But the second film I made about the Illuminati network of secret societies, which is called The Antichrist Conspiracy, actually shows that the plan of Washington, D.C. is using elements from the ancient Roman Empire, and it's also using elements from Egypt. And the canal that you have leading up to the Washington Monument, this is a feature that you find in underground temples in ancient Greece, where oracles, these were psychic mediums who never used to go above ground. Very rarely they used to go above ground. And these psychics were visited by the great elite thinkers, the elite rulers of the Roman Empire, people who really designed the Roman Empire, people like Socrates, Aristotle, and of course Democritus. Now, what I should say is that the system of democracy, which we saw evolve in the Roman Empire, was actually a sick joke. And the people that created the democratic system, where you had the Senate, the senators, and this ring, or this House of Representatives, that were a buffer between the people and the royal family, the Caesars. The people that were running the democratic system in ancient Rome even admit in their own writings that the democratic system, so-called democratic system from Democritus, did not actually work once you had more than 300 people. What we call democracy nowadays is really basically a person, a member of the public, who goes into a booth, they put a simple cross on a scrap of paper, and remember, a cross is historically, the substitute for a signature. A cross is really the mark of an illiterate person. And they put this scrap of paper into a black box, and for the next 4 years or 5 years, an elite can do whatever they want based on these scraps of paper. Well, who counts the scraps of paper? Well, in Britain and in many parts, many countries of Europe, the ballot papers, the actual voting papers, are counted by people who work in local government. And those people are traditionally Freemasons, members of the Round Table, and members of other secret societies. There is actually no proper democracy working anywhere, in any country, anywhere on planet Earth right now. In actual fact, what we have is we have a democratic dictatorship. And a good example would be the presidential election of 2004, I believe, where you had John Kerry and George W. Bush, and out of 300 million people, it just so happened that the two men out of 300 million people that were chosen to fight the presidential election were both members of the Skull and Bones secret society, which itself is an offshoot from a European secret society that was started by Adam Weishaupt in Bavaria, in Germany, in the late 1700s.
Mm-hmm.
So the influence of the Roman Empire, this fake form of democracy, we're really seeing that happening right now, not only in America, but in many other parts of the world as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Chris, where do you think they're taking our planet right now? A lot of people are convinced that while we're not seeing the end of the world, and I'm not somebody seeing the end of the world, I'm seeing the end of this phase of civilization, some of this top secret space exploration that's been going on.
Okay, well, what I believe is happening, this research came out when I was making Spirit World. My Spirit World film actually has taken more than 5 years to make. What I think is the situation is that the planet itself is a super living organism. And we have billions and trillions of different types of living creatures, insects, and all different categories of life living on our planet. And these trillions of life forms are, in actual fact, physical manifestations of the will of the spirit of the actual planet to exist itself. And I believe that all planets are actually super living organisms, and they each have their own unique kind of system. And they have their own physical system, they have their own spiritual systems. In actual fact, the most influential, most ancient books about magic, which are the foundation teaching books which are used to teach people when they go through the initiation degrees of World International Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, and other secret societies. Those books, they all say that planets and stars are spirits. Not only that, but some of the planets and stars are actually termed as angels. And in ancient Greece, Zeus, the god Zeus, is actually the planet Jupiter. And so I believe that every single planet has its own spirit. Now, what we see here on the Earth is we see oil being sucked out of the planet. And as I said before, the Kogi Indians consider the oil to be like the blood of the planet. We see, like you say, a war on the trees, the actual forested areas. And remember, the whole of Europe used to be one gigantic forest. For example, the United Kingdom, especially Cornwall, Devon, Wales, that was just one never-ending forest. The whole of Ireland was an entire island forest. Deforestation is not only a catastrophe for the living organisms that live in those forests on the surface of the planet, deforestation is also an enormous catastrophe for the atmosphere of the planet. And our atmosphere is definitely being changed. Now, you mentioned genetic modifications. There are tomatoes and other different food products in mainline products and also being sold just as normal fruit and vegetables in our supermarkets, which have genes from animals injected into these fruits and vegetables. And this is no secret. There are huge investments going on right now. I'm talking about millions and billions of dollars in how the genetic material from certain animals can be injected into fruit and vegetables. And I'll give you for example, many of the tomatoes in Europe for sale today contain genetic material from spiders. Now, people who spend all their time planning on how to inject a tomato with the genetic material from a spider, hanging is too good for these people. They are trying to become, the spiritual, physical, genetic masters of this planet.
They want to live forever.
Yes. There is certainly a theme throughout history with all of these elite families, the richest, most powerful families on the planet. They are all, one time or another throughout their history, fascinated with the idea of obtaining an elixir of life or obtaining some special genetic information. A good example of that would be the Nazis, who went to the Himalayas and actually brought back a whole group of Tibetan lamas, Tibetan monks, to Berlin, and they were formed into their own sort of mini secret society called the Men with Green Hats. And the reason that the Nazis wanted these Tibetan lamas back in Germany is because there's a great tradition in Tibet of reincarnation, and the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying teaches you that if you know the signs through the death experience, you can guide your soul into a fresh body, and that you will remember a lot of your previous life. And the Nazis, the elite, who, let's face it, were actually funded by banking corporations in America. Heinrich Himmler was the godchild of Prince Heinrich of Bavaria, who is in turn related to the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha royal dynasty of Europe. And those people are the same family as the British royal family. The German Nazi elite wanted to use this ancient information to try and perpetuate, their souls and their spirits into fresh bodies forever, and to rule the world forever. So, these themes, these subjects are all interconnected.
Do you think that some of these people are going to be successful in getting their bodies, their physical bodies, off the planet? Because it does seem like that's in the works for some of these individuals and characters with the money to do so. I mean, they have a lunar ark they're building on the moon, and that's just what we know about. The Doomsday Seed Vault, for whatever reason, over near Norway. And so we're wondering what they are aware of that we haven't been told about.
Well, if you go through, lots of magazines, especially magazines and newspapers published in Canada and America, there are lots of companies actually making various protection-type panic rooms and chambers and survival units which can be buried into the ground. To be absolutely honest, looking through history, when I was making my Illuminati films, I came to the conclusion that people who are scared and so afraid that they are just going to buy a survival unit and bury it into their backyard and, stock up on foodstuffs and just live in the ground. This is really the ultimate goal of the Illuminati super wealthy families. This is exactly the way they want people to react. The catastrophes that you see on the news, they are happening, but there's also rumors of catastrophes such as economic catastrophes. And what the Illuminati elite families want you to do is to be scared. They want you to live in fear. Fear is a tool which they've used throughout history to control the population. If people are living in fear, they're less likely to organize a rebellion. Revolution is what the Illuminati families fear the most.
And one of the things that they do here in this country is they bombard us with so much information, most of it bad news, warped news, that a lot of people just become apathetic and completely shut down.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the other, that's the other main tactic which you see in the media. But I just want to say that, people should not be looking to bury themselves in a survival chamber in their backyards. What people need to do is they need to really study the successful revolutions that have happened throughout history, and there are quite a few of them. And they need to recognize that revolutions are generally, that they come up in cycles in history. Unfortunately, the most recent revolutions, such as the ones we saw in the Eastern Bloc countries and the Soviet Revolution, they were all pre-infiltrated and planned by the Illuminati families. At the time of the so-called Russian Revolution, there was no internet. There was no information superhighway. Now, the elite have got a double-edged sword situation. They want the superhighway because it's great for commerce, it's great for advancing, their agendas in the economic sphere. But at the same time, they are doing as much as they can to limit the information which is coming down through the internet. Now, revolution, when it's organized properly, creates no bloodshed whatsoever. In actual fact, there is a revolution happening right now where, as I said before, millions of people have come into the knowledge that the Illuminati network of global secret societies has existed for a long time. You used to mention these types of things 10 years ago. People used to not know a thing about them. And so we have a revolution happening now. I believe that, am I right in saying that Hillary Clinton is completely off the menu now as far as the presidency is concerned?
Oh, it's possible. Only time will tell. It's also likely that she could be the vice president or in some way or another work with the Obama campaign.
Oh, I see. Well, I said on the radio, I was interviewed in Canada, coast to coast, a couple of months ago, about 3 months ago. I would say that the favored presidential candidate, as far as the Illuminati family is concerned, would be Hillary Clinton. The reason for that is because the Clinton family genealogically are related to the Saxe-Coburg-Gothas, who are the British royal family. And Bill Clinton has already been a reliable slave for the elite, and he put forward a lot of elite agendas while he was president. He bombed countries, remember. He continued this campaign of fear that I was speaking about just a little while ago. And I would have said that Hillary Clinton would have been guaranteed the White House. But you see that they're having to do a soft shoe shuffle at the moment, because so many millions of people, through the power of independent media, the internet, independent publications, are now realizing that the European royalty do control the American political system. And there is a revolution happening. It's happening right now, and it's happening in people's minds.
Chris, before I let you go,
what we need to do now is take that to the next level, where people, everyday people, normal people, start soaking up and taking opportunities to take what little parts of democratic power they can get in their local communities. And if we all invest some time and we all get involved in local government, in the mayor's office, we all take a few hours out of our lives to sit on the local boards which scrutinize police activity and scrutinize the judicial system, such as in Britain and Canada and in the British Commonwealth countries, lots of people can just become justices of the peace. We need to see normal, everyday, family people who are aware of the Illuminati's influence throughout history to take up positions of local democratic power, and then to grow an entire grassroots democratic system, and eventually throw away this ridiculous democratic system we have where the elite put these puppets such as John Kerry and George W. Bush in front of us on the media, and we need to start having real democracy, which in actual fact we've never had so far.
Chris, you have a couple websites. EnigmaTV.com is one of them.
Yes. There's a website for my Illuminati series of films. It's IlluminatiDVD.com. And my Spirit World film is available on SpiritWorldDVD.com.
Yes, and I've seen a couple of them. They're great, and you have David Icke featured in several of them, and I see Alex Jones in one of your more recent ones as well.
Yeah, Alex is featured in The Antichrist Conspiracy. There's a website for that film, which is AntichristDVD.com.
Well, Chris, thank you so very much for coming on.
Okay, well, it's been a pleasure, Alex.
From his website, fortruthseekers.org, after re-experiencing the events of a past life as a Anasazi shaman, Peter was able to reconnect with the spiritual healing abilities from that lifetime. He says on his website he is now able to see and hear and work with people all over the world to unblock their energies and more fully be present here and now in awakening their own abilities and the reasons for which they came to this planet in this current lifetime. Very interesting. Peter, Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Alex.
Give us a little bit of an overview into your website.
Well, my website contains about 383 articles right now, varying from everything from simple spirituality to alien abduction to the bigger picture of the New World Order. I guess my specialty is the bigger picture rather than dealing with the smaller events that are keeping us focused on day-to-day living. My whole mission, I think, right now is to get people in touch with their own personal guidance so that that minefield that you might call the future and certainly describe in so vividly with all the difficult things coming toward us, we're going to need some guidance to get through this one way or another. There's another question, too, whether just surviving what's going to come is what's really important, or is it more important to do what we came here to do spiritually? So I also have the first 2 volumes of my 9-volume book there that tells a whole history of this situation. Takes us from pre-Earth days to what's coming in the future, very near future. It also has a number of radio interviews and just lots of ways to get hold of myself. I have a Yahoo group that people can join and discuss with others what's going on.
Peter, let me get a quick analysis from you on what's happening on the planet Earth today.
Well, I think everyone's heard about planetary ascension. You can call it entry into the Hopi Fifth World. You can call it the Mayan end of the Mayan calendar. You can call it many things, but pretty much the vibration on the planet is moving from third dimensional to fifth dimensional. We're already passing through a fourth dimensional state where people are seeing more UFOs and ghosts and being more psychic and so on, but the basic spiritual purpose of the planet at this time is to raise itself in consciousness to a fifth dimensional level. And unfortunately, what powers the ascension process is the consciousness of the people on the planet. So a big part of what needs to be done is to raise the consciousness of everyone spiritually. And probably the biggest weapon that is used against us, as David Icke and many others will tell you, is fear. So many of the things we talk about in the news and the news itself is all based on creating more and more fear in us so that we fall into a victim consciousness and forget that we are spiritual beings here fighting a spiritual war to overcome what's going on in the dark side, whatever you may think that is.
Peter, you have written a couple articles about the New World Order, or your understanding of it. You do identify that there are elite groups on the planet, and there's a physical problem manifesting today that we have to address. What is your main concern concerning the planet today, whether it be wars, famines, pandemics, or food shortages?
Well, I think those are all genuine concerns, and I know, a lot of people understand that Earth changes are part of this ascension process, and those are, the biggest news we watch these days is about the weather. This is not normal weather. We just had 13 tornadoes in New Mexico a few weeks ago, where they, had 1 or 2 a year if they were lucky. All of a sudden, on one day, they have 13. The flooding going on, the drought, you name it. The weather is the news. And so that's part of what we like to say about our spiritual purposes here is that we're just weathermen telling people that there's a storm coming and they need to get ready. People have to not worry too much about surviving this process. If you get in touch with your spiritual side of things, you know that you go on eternally. And so this is just another lifetime and a lot of experience for you, but it's certainly a time when we all need to get up and be the best we can to fight off this dark side so that it doesn't exist time after time that we come back to the planet or wherever we go in creation.
Peter,
There's
some of
always
these
ways to deal with the flu, the bird flu and so on, but and stay healthy, as you've mentioned. But it's a real minefield, the future, and if you are in contact with your spiritual guidance, they can lead you through that minefield, moment by moment by moment, and avoid so much pain and anguish and lead you to a place where you'll be able to help others. That's what we're trying to do. A lot of what I do in my Yahoo group and with students and so on is teach them to channel their own guidance, to connect more firmly with their guidance, to use it for everything they do. Right now, I don't eat, drink, wear, clothing, do whatever without asking my guidance what I should eat, drink, wear, etc. Therefore, I avoid so many of the poisonous foods and so on. And it just gives me a better style of life, a healthier style of life, and it's preparing me for the bigger things that are coming.
What I've noticed, Peter, in reporting on genetically modified food is that there's a very high likelihood of a pandemic breaking out, a Pandora's box, if you will, where organic food really truly dries up from the threat of Monsanto and these oil rapeseeds. That's one issue over a whole Rolodex of other things also discussed on this program. And a lot of skeptics, if you will, that believe that everything is going to be perfect for the rest of our lives and all of these concerns of ours are completely illusionary. I do wonder and play the devil's advocate because I see a lot of different things intersecting at the same point in time. Here we have climatic changes, and we also have major changes between the citizens or the people of the U.S., actually the population of the world, and their relationship to law enforcement. These large increasing gaps between the rich and the poor. So I'm seeing a lot of people reach out to the spiritual perspective on life to psychologically handle what is already here today presently. My question to you is, there are people out there that believe that consciousness is here and it's going to completely eradicate a lot of the stuff that's existing today. Do you see that as being the ultimate reality, or that these things will come to pass and it's the spiritual energy that'll help us survive that aftermath?
Well, unfortunately, what I see is a lot of spiritual people who, whatever they're connected to, their spirituality tells them to sit on their hands and do nothing. And that's a total wrong idea. I mean, the idea of creation is to create. And we came into this lifetime, we came into these bodies, we came into the places we were born, the families. We have these talents that we brought to this planet to do something with, to ameliorate the situation. There's nothing now going to stop some of the earth changes, and certainly the New World Order isn't going to roll over and play dead like some people who talk about Nasara thing. But something has to be done. I mean, people have stopped communicating with each other. That's one of the ways the New World Order has controlled us for so long. If we all got together just in little town groups or in living rooms or so on, which is probably against the Patriot Act right now, we'd be able to share what we know, what we experience. We'd have some strength. We'd have some support from other people. The biggest problem I see in dealing with people all around the world is they think they're all alone in their little place in whatever town it is. I gave a talk in a little town in upstate New York where the lady hid her David Icke books and Zechariah Sitchin books up in the attic. And when she came to my discussion, there were all her neighbors. She was afraid that, she was the only one in this town, and yet she found out that all her neighbors had the same kind of understandings of what's going on. If we could communicate and talk and on a real level, get away from the television set, no offense, then we'd find out that everyone is experiencing or understanding certain things. I've lived in Roswell, New Mexico for most of my time in this country, and down there we have a UFO museum. And I've talked with so many people coming into that UFO museum about their experiences, and pretty much everyone who comes in has an experience of abduction, of seeing UFOs, of lights, or whatever. But every one of them says, but this is the first time I've ever talked about it, because that's the only place they feel validated or comfortable in talking about these kind of things. If we could all come out and discuss on a real level what we know is going on, as programs such as yours do, then we'd all find out that we're all human beings going through a similar experience, and we all have the same feelings that this isn't right. We've got to do something about it.
This quest for true, real, genuine spirituality that is at the individual level is something that a lot of people, Peter, have a hard time grasping when you talk about guidance speaking with you, if they believe that that in fact is completely impossible. How do you address that?
Well, I teach everyone the channel with a real simple little written exercise that I also use in English classes. And you know, the only people that can't do it are those who say I can't do it right up front. Everyone else does it almost perfectly, first time, and every time from then on. And it's just like spirituality is a muscle, just like every other muscle in the body. And the more we work with it, the stronger it grows, and the easier it gets. And that's what connecting with your guidance is. I mean, right now, all of us have intuition. All of us have dreams. All of us have these other ways that Spirit tries to connect with us on a day-to-day basis. But to get through what's coming, or even today, to have that moment-to-moment guidance, it makes all the difference on whether you survive, on whether you actually accomplish your mission here, on where you go from here. I mean, this is a spiritual battlefield, and we win our spiritual medals by what we do in this lifetime, not by what we do in meditation out there somewhere or hiding in a little cave. You know, it's who did you help today? That's your spiritual medals. Spirituality is about what you do for other people. Too many people who talk about spirituality think it's all about them and their awareness and what they do. You know, you can go out and help other people. That's what increases your awareness.
Okay, so the person's saying, Peter, I don't want to hear about the New World Order. I don't want to hear about all these bad things. It makes me feel bad. I just want to feel good and be
spiritual. And there's a lot
spiritual.
of those out there, aren't there, Alex? You know them. I know them too. And you know what? The prime directive of creation is free will. So if they have made a choice to say that, to do that, you have no right to interfere with their space, right? All I do is I put my website out there, I give talks, I do whatever, and people have the free will choice to come, listen, accept, or not. When I go to a movie I don't like, I get up and I leave. I don't stand there for a couple of hours trying to convince the whole audience to leave with me.
Now, that's very key what you said there about free will. I mentioned that at least on every other show, this is about a free will fight collectively against this darkness that we're facing. And individually, we have to kind of claw our way out of it because it's our mess, it's our bed, we made it, now we have to sleep in it and remake it. But it's very interesting to see these things escalate, and it really does raise the question, can consciousness, as you describe it, or the amount of people talking to their guidance, actually be able to stop what's coming, or is what's coming already written down in the history books already in some other dimension, that we're going to actually learn something from the things to come?
Well, we all need to go out and watch Lawrence of Arabia again, because that man proved that nothing is written. We lay our own tracks if we're off the grid, you know, the basic train track of the mass matrix consciousness. Then we start laying our own tracks, and everything. We can change anything and everything. The power of one individual following their spiritual guidance is immense. The energy work I do, you know, you talk about poison foods and this and that. You can change the energy of anything by just your pure intent of your, I wouldn't call it consciousness, but I'd call it spiritual willpower. So many things can change. The future right now is different than it was, say, a year ago. People out there have been doing things spiritually that have affected everyone else and the direction of this planet and this ascension process. And most of them did it working alone or with just, you know, a couple of, or a few people, because not many people are doing the real spiritual work. They're too busy focused on their own survival or their own spiritual awareness, or whatever you want to call it. I deal with pretty much high-level spiritual beings. I know most of who I work with. And most of them come from a higher level of dimensionality than the fifth dimension anyway. They're like tutors who have been sent back to the third grade to help us ascend into the fifth grade. Well, you know, if you've already been through all these processes, you don't have to worry about your own ascension. You came here to do a job to help these third graders get into the fifth grade. So stop worrying about your own private little, ascension process and get out there and help the others that you came here to help. That's the kind of people that listen to these programs who are awake at this time, those who came back here to help.
Peter, this guidance that you speak of, and I've read a lot of different perspectives on information that people have received. And I'm curious what information you've received. We spoke briefly over email, and we were talking about Mount St. Helens, which is a theme that I keep hearing come up over and over and over again, which is in our backyard here in Portland, Oregon.
I'd worry more about Mount Hood than Mount St. Helens right now. But yeah, I spent some time up in West Lynn outside of Portland there last year, and guidance was saying it wasn't a greatly safe place to be. So today, what was coming through some other members who channel in my group was probably something to do with the New Madrid fault over there in Missouri, the one that really created the biggest earthquake this country's ever seen and made the Mississippi run backwards. This planet is all connected, and you see earthquakes going off in Chile, and you see something going on in Japan around the whole ring of fire. It's all interconnected. One thing happens one place, it's going to affect everything. When I used to teach middle school and high school, on days when there were big earthquakes around the planet, you just notice your kids are real jumpy, just like ants or animals get jumpy on days like that. We're all tuned in and tied into the planet. So whatever we do affects everyone else, and what happens in one place is going to affect everywhere else. There are safe places on the planet, but these have changed recently because of changes made in the ascension process. That's pretty much why I just moved all my things out of Roswell, as a matter of fact, a week ago. But and I'm heading for somewhere a little safer for down the road, but if you have your guidance, they're going to lead you to be where you need to be.
Peter, for years and years and years, different maps have been produced that have been made, drawn out by self-proposed psychics, mediums, people of the sort that have had their visions about what the future of the U.S. is going to look like in terms of water coming into the East Coast, water coming into the West Coast. A lot of people feel very nervous in the Oregon area about the coastal region, but feel safer more towards Eastern Oregon. And then I've also noticed major changes happening within the military in terms of the political news that we cover on this program, with U.S. Northcom and NORAD being based in Colorado Springs, and also the continuity of government. Secure bunker location in Wyoming. I notice it's in Middle America, in the area where the maps are seen to be safe by some of these people that have drawn some of these maps. I also look at the ability that people claim they have with remote viewing. And that's, to go over that briefly, as you may already know, it's different people focusing on something that they're not actually seeing physically, but in their minds, and they map out where there are similar experiences between each of the person practicing remote viewing that are placed in different rooms. So if I see a correlation, a similarity in what people are seeing, it kind of interests me into if there's any credibility to it.
Well, the one thing you can count on planet Earth is change. Things change. So I wouldn't go putting my whole, stock futures on any one stock right now. I know from some of my connections that a lot of the government agencies are moving into Denver, and a lot of people are being told to move to Denver and northern New Mexico. Northern New Mexico, especially, most of the spiritual people seem to have a real connection there, and I know from my former Anasazi lifetime that it is a very special place, but safe. This, again, comes down to, is it a question about being safe, or is it a question about doing what you came here to do? Life is going to get very, very difficult. This would be a great time to leave the planet. I've been talking to my guidance about that for a while.
Well, Peter, when it comes to the work that we're supposed to do, for me, I know there's much work that I'm going to have to do once this program's over with, when there's perhaps an event that makes this program impossible, and that's caring, sharing and trying to help other people stay alive in the crisis and extending your love in a way that you weren't doing the controlled matrix control grid. I mean, it's a whole change of lifestyle that will happen overnight, where people really have to look in the mirror on who they really are and what they stand for.
Yeah, I've had my own training in that, in survival and so on, and using my guidance to survive in very difficult situations. And they said to me, everyone will need to know this down the future. And we have a 5-minute drill. When you see all these earthquakes and floods and everything happening, people always talk about, well, I had 5 minutes to go into my house and get what I could and run out with it. And we all need to practice that. What's important to you? If you had 5 minutes to run into your house, and where would you go once you run out of that house? I was in Florida in 2004 during the 4 hurricanes that hit it, and I saw the freeways, just at a standstill. You're not going to go anywhere on a lot of these freeways if anything happens. All you need is one underpass or overpass to collapse, and that's it. So people just, as I say, we're weathermen, telling people a storm's going to come and you need to get ready and have some plans. That's even being sponsored in advertisements on regular television. The government is just paying people to say, you need to have a plan in case of an emergency.
Because we know they have a plan, don't we?
Yeah, we do. I was just reading something about the government of Israel having a big bunker out near Lod Airport. So, yeah, they're all pretty much safe. They know where to go and when to go, but...
Now, Peter, this is truly a unique perspective. That's why I appreciate it. You have the usual perspective, which most of us receive from people in the Patriot community, that it's about guns, ammunition, preparation, even though when food runs out, you can't actually eat your bullets, which I find to be kind of interesting. So I think they should also, the survivalists, be more interested in gardening and sustainable living so they can survive independently from the control grid. So I see that there's a lot of misinformation, and I agree that it's very...
Stories have is that, the weapons the dark side or the New World Order have just make anything we can even attain ridiculous. They can beam a sound wave at us or something from 10 miles away and we'll be rolling on the floor. What are you going to do with a gun in that situation? Nothing. The weapons they have are always far more advanced than they tell us, too. So, for crowd control and so on.
But I think there is a real balance, Peter, between preparing yourself, getting your barter items together, your preparations and your exit plans, while becoming those spiritual being that you can, if you do it with the right intent.
That's right. And one of the greatest barter items you have is what you can do, the things you know, the talents, the abilities you have. That's what community is built on, different things people know. People talk to me about their spiritual missions here on the planet, and they go, oh, I can't do what you do. Well, I go, well, your mission's not mine. You don't send out an army of any kind with just soldiers. You have a lot of support crew. You have truck drivers. You have food things. You have nurses. You have doctors. This is what, if you do your mission and I do my mission, then this community of spiritual beings that we are can accomplish a great deal. But don't judge yourself by other people's standards. Your mission may be totally different from your husband's, from your neighbor's, from anybody else's you know. And you've got to feel good about that and trust in that and center yourself in that.
There's something called cosmic radiation, Peter, and there's also other people that talk about increased solar activity, and we are seeing changes within the weather and especially the temperatures. A lot of these prophets and predictions that were made about climatic change, about the Earth heating up, don't necessarily make mention of CO2 emissions. They make mention, though, of natural climatic changes every 26,000 years. What is your take on that?
It's a little out of my specialty. I know that, the space shuttle taking off releases more CO2 and ozone and things into the higher atmosphere than every one of us using underarm deodorant all day long. So, you got to get real. We're brainwashed into believing so many things. But, and I come from Australia, and down in Australia now they're making kids not only wear hats out in the playground, but sunglasses, because of the holes in the ozone layer down there. I mean, that's very sad to me. If we got into talking about David Icke's reptilians, then then they're destroying the environment on this planet, which will make it more livable for these beings or the New World Order or whoever. And most of us will either be non-existent or crippled or slaves or whatever we were.
Peter, we don't go too far into UFOs only because we make this a factual news program. However, since you did bring it up, I'll go ahead and ask you the question.
Well, UFOs
because I've heard it mentioned by other people. So my question is, how significant do you think the sightings of UFOs are going to be in the near future, come towards the year 2012?
Not very.
Not very. Okay.
You know, there's aliens and there's UFOs, and they're two different things. You know, not all aliens. When you work with dimensionality, you know, I worked with Bud Hopkins and some of the abductee specialists. When aliens take abductees out through the roof, they don't, you know, open the door and climb up on the roof. They take them out through the physical roof. So you've got to talk about dimensionality when you talk about the whole situation with aliens and so on. And that's things you can't see, and that's where conversation breaks down. If people can't see it, then they don't want to believe in it. And yet most of us have experiences, and we watch and listen to programs like these that talk about a lot of people having experiences. And it's out there. And the more you look into it and educate yourself and practice with your own spirituality, the more you too will be able to see and hear.
Well, I happen to believe in extraterrestrials. I actually do. I just happen to believe that it's not going to be information everyone is ready for at this time. If they can't even actually be prepared, Peter, for very basic black and white evidence of what's happening with the economy, how can they possibly be prepared to go from third dimension reality and understand what's happening here in the physical to going all the way up there?
But that's how the New World Order has kept us controlled by making all this. The whole idea of conspiracy theory. It's not a theory, it's a reality. But if you call it a theory and you start laughing at people who say these things, then other people will be scared not to stand up and talk about it. And it's the same thing with aliens. I mean, they're a reality. How many people email me every day with their stories of aliens and stuff that are very dominant in their lives.
Well, since you brought it up a couple times, aliens, what is the significance today with aliens within our government or operating on the planet today?
Well, if you...
I mean, before we go, we're going to let you go here, but well, I'm sure a lot of people would like to know then, from your perspective and your research, what is the significance of an alien presence on Earth today in these current Earth changes and this current change right now in our government and all these talks of war and pollution and a possible food famine?
Well, I think the X-Files movie got it right that, you know, you have the New World Order, the suited businessmen on this planet, but who's above them? I mean, there are alien controls in this corner of the universe, and they're the ones who run the business people down here, who then run the New World Order, who then, you know, it's a hierarchy.
How can we document some of this?
How can we document some of this? Personal experience is always the best way to do it, isn't it? I mean, I don't ever ask anyone to believe anything I say. You know, everything I do is trying to get people to have their own experiences and to build their own spiritual muscles so they can connect and have their own experiences too. I would never ask anyone to believe anything I write. But you know what? When you write enough and it paints a picture, you know, I call myself a puzzle master because I just put all the little pieces together and it forms this big picture. And when everything fits so perfectly, it's hard to deny that picture that's formed.
Well, Peter, I want to thank you very much for providing all that information. And your website is www.fortruthseekers.org. And before I let you go, just as a last quick comment, for people listening right now that are looking for somewhere to put their energy spiritually, is there anything you can be more specific in terms of just getting active or just beginning to care and share more than we have previously?
Yeah, spirituality is all about other people and what you do for them.
Dr. Robert Duncan, a man who holds multiple degrees from Harvard and other universities in computer science and artificial intelligence. He has extensive knowledge into the world of information and psychological warfare tactics and technologies. Dr. Duncan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for having me. And it is quite a pleasure to speak on one of the few free remaining information streams on the internet. As Thomas Jefferson warned us, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance.
Well, of course, what we're going to be talking about tonight is a very complicated issue and, of course, requires hours and hours and hours of investigation to even understand the surface level of the information that we're going to talk about. But just to start this off, can you give us a brief overview of both your research, the projects you've been a part of, and your education before you begin to research mind control technology?
Sure. All my life, I've tried to integrate machines with humans, from bionics to robotics. And my investigation, as of late, involved virtual reality for telemedicine and telerobotics for the Army. So in order for doctors not to be put in the line of fire, they would send out a truck, and the doctor could perform robotic surgery on the patients. Enhanced reality heads-up displays using NASA's heads-up display goggles and haptic feedback gloves, which means force feedback. You can manipulate a virtual world. And this research led me throughout time to take the next step. How do you create a virtual reality through direct neural inductions? And that means inducing neural signals from the outside world, very much like the movie The Matrix, except without a plug-in wire. So this investigation about 2.5 years ago led to the topic of mind control. And you very quickly realize this technology has existed for almost 3 decades.
How much of this includes the use of brain chips?
Very little. Brain chips were used in many investigations, both in the Army and other military groups, but the current technology requires no brain implants whatsoever.
Go ahead.
There was a lot of research done on monkeys back in the 90s with Duke University, where they could get monkeys to manipulate robotic arms, play video games, and these used implants, electrodes in the brain. But that's obviously not very practical and is not the ultimate goal of mind control. You would want to have a wireless method in order to both control populations, create brave voyeurs, to manipulate the human organism, as it's called in literature, precisely, every human function. And a colonel quoted back in the 70s bragged that he could control every human function at 450 megahertz. So that is the objective of mind control. It goes under many names. From the Eastern Bloc countries, call it biocommunication technology, bioamplification, psychotronic generators, creating sociopaths that go on murderous rampages, hopefully for some sort of military target, bioelectromagnetic warfare, wireless cybernetics, and the list goes on for another 3 pages.
Now, you just mentioned that there were no brain chips required in creating someone to fulfill a task or influencing someone to feel a certain way. You're saying it does not require a brain chip. This is done through other means. How long have you known about this, and when did you start to investigate this?
Like I said, about 2.5 years ago, I became aware that there were technologies that are being used on the population that I didn't know about. And I'm a technophile. I love technologies. I love being on the cutting edge. And so, of course, my interest quickly took me to this wireless cybernetics or mind control technology that initially came out of the CIA. In 1943, President Truman signed National Security Act creating the CIA, and one of their main tasks was to create mind control technology, and made popular by movies like The Manchurian Candidate, creating programmed assassins like through Project Monarch, MK, which means Meinung Controller, It's the German for mind control, MK Ultra, Delta, MK Search, and the list goes on. The military often calls their experiments into controlling humans behavior modification, but none of it is for peaceful purposes. It's all to take control of the enemy's mind or machines. And currently it resides under the Directed Energy Directorate of the Air Force. They have a program called Personnel Effects, where they describe a lot of these capabilities of making the target controlling their senses in every way so that they misjudge the horizon. For instance, in JFK Jr.'s situation, that's exactly what the weapon was supposed to do. It's a weapon of delusion, illusion, and deception.
Now, in terms of the large amount of people on the web that are claiming that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of cases of what some people call gang stalking. Now, my question to you is, how much of this do you think is paranoia as opposed to something legitimately happening? Or could it be possibly a side effect of some testing that may not be intentionally focused on them particularly?
That's a good question, and you're absolutely right. Gang stalking is a phenomena that's really gotten a lot of attention on the internet, and I would say less than 10% of it is real. But if you go back to the documents of MK Ultra released through the Freedom of Information Act, it is listed right there as a method to gaslight, to make paranoid certain people. And this is used in the CIA bag of tricks to discredit an individual in public. So yes, much of what you read about is side effects from the weapon testing and drug testing, as well as a few real incidences. So probably less than 10% is what I would say.
We actually know quite a bit about MK Ultra, thanks to all, as you noted, the Freedom of Information Act, and of course all the stuff that's been declassified since. Naturally, of course, the church hearings of 1977 brought a lot of this to the consciousness at that time of the average American viewer. I remember ABC actually had a special on it in 1978 documenting what happened. I find that quite interesting, how the media forgot about that in light of this new war on terror and this new technology that they are experimenting with as we speak.
Absolutely true. And in fact, Frank Church is one of my heroes. I'm calling you from Boise, Idaho. This is where he was from. And it's important that we never forget what he brought to light, that these experiments on the American people and used unfairly against other people of the world is quite real and quite perfected. So absolutely, we should not forget that. There are psychological warfare tactics that help each generation forget about the atrocities of the past. So cultural memory, in effect, is sort of erased after 10 years, and it has to be brought back to light for us to remember what has been done and why we must be vigilant about our government and have the checks and balances in place to do it.
Now, you mentioned in your bio that you've done work for the Department of Defense and the CIA developing robotics in medicine, virtual reality in telemedicine, tank recognition and classification from satellites, and artificial intelligence used to track Soviet nuclear submarines. Can you tell us a little bit more about that work?
Probably not without being killed, but
just what you can.
Everything has a signature, and so classification is the very essence of all artificial intelligence. It's even what the human brain does. So the military has a lot of projects that utilize this capability, and examples of projects that I've worked on, you mentioned tracking the Soviet nuclear submarine fleet. Well, the submarines have particular signatures, but it's using sound. Satellites can give us images in the visual spectrum where we recognize tanks, for example. Well, humans, to bring this back to the topic, have their own unique resonance signatures based on their body mass and composition, as well as brain print signatures, which is a newer technology used today for lie detection. But it goes much more, it gets much more sophisticated as you dive into it, that every human function has been mapped out to some extent, and that we are all just slight variances from some mean. You map out the cognitive model of the average human, you can influence almost everybody on Earth to some degree.
I want to ask you about the use of sonar. And does this fall in any way or any category into possible ways that mind control could be tested on the public?
Sonar used mostly just underwater. There are acoustic technologies. American Technology Corporation produces a weapon that's classified as non-lethal that can project sound into people at a distance, very focused beam. And some of the capabilities are often called voice of God weapons. So you can trick somebody into believing they're hearing the voice of God. You can brainwash them to do almost anything. The Sony Corporation has 4 patents in the patent office for direct neural stimulation for gaming applications that utilize ultrasonics, which causes a mechanical deformation in the ion channels of neurons. And you can time it just right, you induce a signal or a virtual a reality experience. There's another company, Japanese Telecom, that has a pair of headphones that actually induces a small electric current into the inner ear, and you, with a joystick, you can control somebody's movement due to balance. So there are a lot of applications that are already coming out in the civilian world that are about 30 years behind the military technology.
And now the information is coming out. The things that we thought were theories 10 years ago are now things that they brag about on Defense Tech and other related publications. The reason I brought up sonar is because I do understand that, you know, there are certain similarities that humans have with other mammals. And in terms of whales and dolphins, we've seen a large number of them washed up upon the shore in Texas recently from the use of sonar. And I just wonder sometimes if there's any way that humans could also be affected by the same technology that clearly is affecting other members of the mammalian kingdom.
You know, I was asked the same question on Coast to Coast, and I did some humpback whale research in Alaska about 15 years ago, and there's no doubt that sonar can drive whales to beach themselves. Some Navy experiments involve using magnetic fields on sharks and strapping torpedoes on them to steer them to their targets. Similar experiments have been done on dolphins. And absolutely, we're all related to other creatures on this earth through the evolutionary chain, and we can be controlled in similar fashion.
Now, I want to get back, and thanks for explaining that, but what you were just about to explain before that was also important. I think we should move into the directed energy weapons. We have some slides ready on the screen, and I want to talk a little bit about what you were talking about. That is the implanting of a thought, a feeling, an emotion, some sort of reaction. What we do know and what we can stand by in terms of evidence and facts is that the technology does exist, the electromagnetic weapons to create a feeling of heat within the human body, entirely paralyze an entire crowd. They call them the paralyzing spotlights. There are also the sonic weapons that you talked about as well, the sound weapons, which they had at the RNC in 2004. There are so many of these different forms of technology that relate back to directed energy weapons. How exactly does this work in terms of technology interfacing with the human mind?
On a gross scale, you can affect people's behaviors. And back in 1976, on the 200th anniversary of this country, the Russians started beaming a very powerful psychotronic signal over the population. And the Army intelligence came forward and said, we aren't really sure what this is about, but it looks like they're trying to lull the population into a hypnotic state, relax them. this weapon can be used to affect entire populations. There's a famous town called Taos, New Mexico, that was attacked by this weapon system. People got dizzy, they heard a buzzing in their ears, and some got nosebleeds. So over a population, you can control and try to conform their thought processes. This, of course, could be abused and is abused by manipulating elections or the general sentiment of the crowd. Now, a colonel from the Danish Air Force working with the U.S. Back in the 70s again, claimed that he observed a person who was being beamed with radio frequency energy from the next room, that they could induce any emotion into him. And the most interesting one was white-hot anger. So they can make people violent with just a simple brain entrainment, induction in the human nervous system.
Now we do know that technology that you speak of has been used in Iraq. That part is public. Now we find ourselves facing a school shooting, and I'm going to be fairly objective with the story. I'm going to be presenting a lot of facts that are available up to the minute at this point. What is your take on this recent school shooting and other school shootings and other amazing and unthinkable acts of violence that we've seen in just the last year alone?
It's truly depressing for me to see these world events, because the very nature of the weapons system involves plausible deniability. People can't understand the sophistication and exactness of this weapon system in inducing aggressive behavior, and you can't see the energy, and what you can't see, people often don't believe. There are many events throughout history that are questionable. This technology is so precise that it could have been used to make JFK Jr. crash his plane and misjudge the horizon. It could have been made, it could have caused the driver of Princess Di to crash into the median. It truly has this power, and there's no way for the public to ever know if these were natural accidents or natural psychotics going crazy. It's just that there have been so many examples that totally fit the profile of school massacres, for example, and that it can be used to induce white-hot anger and assassinations. One of the more famous scripts the CIA uses is the love addiction, the obsessive love addiction. Now, they use that for the the John Lennon assassination. The one, John Hinckley, for example, also had this love-obsessed delusion. And this is, again, scripted, coming directly out of CIA documents, that these are the discrediting tactics for programmed assassins that they've been working on, such as Project Monarch and the newer, still classified project codename Snow White. So, absolutely, school massacres can be induced using this weapon. And what would the reason be? Well, it's to take away the weapons that can overthrow a tyrannous government, taking away rights slowly. So the public reacts and the press reacts with, we must take away guns from people. And so it seems to fit this sort of so-called New World Order strategy quite nicely.
I remember reading last week when the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense released a 90-page report where they prophesized, I would say, the year 2035 and the kind of weaponry that will be used and for what reasons at that time. One of the things that was mentioned was the use of electromagnetic weapons, not so much for mind control, but for taking out an entire city's electrical grid. That includes satellites, communication devices, cell phones, televisions, telephones, etc., etc. I find that to be quite amazing.
Yes, they're often called E-bombs, electronic warfare bombs. And while on a sort of electronic mass destruction weapon that is interesting, can be done,
Because I would think if I was going to invade a country, and if I was one of these sick bastards in control right now of the nuclear warheads, that's what I would drop first, an electromagnetic weapon, and then move in.
Absolutely, and disabling communications can cause panic, as well as all the weapon systems are pretty much disabled since everything runs on electricity.
So to keep this simple, though, Robert, before we're done, we're talking about a technology that works both ways, scanning minds and, of course, implanting a thought. I guess you would say it's similar to a set of headphones that you can both hear the acoustic sound and, of course, use them as a double application as a microphone.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the only way that the technology really works effectively is the bidirectional communication. So it involves the most invasive form of privacy as well as control. And, every single right that the Constitution affords us and the Bill of Rights is taken away with this technology. This is why it's being kept more secret than the Manhattan Project, is that people would get very scared that their country has been overthrown if they knew this technology existed.
That's a good point. A lot of people wonder if there was something alternative to know about 9/11, that more people would have talked about it. Tell me a little bit about the Manhattan Project and how many people were involved in keeping that secret.
Oh, Oppenheimer was the most famous scientist that was working on it at the time. A lot of people give credit to Einstein for originally bringing over some of the theories about energy and matter conversion. But they were able to keep the development of this weapon secret for many years. And, of course, as with all technology, the military gets it first for all the bad uses they can use it for, and then eventually it gets transferred to the civilian scientists and population for all the good uses. So you give the militants fire, they will burn down villages. You give it to the civilian population, they will cook food, kill bacteria, and keep warm with it. And that's just the way the technology evolution works in our system.
A lot of stuff building up, sir. What's your take on the world at large and how quickly things are moving?
What it's really making me be is in the observer mode to keep watch on how fast they're basically programming everybody here in the United States and the rest of the world to what they want to get done. And of course, like you said today, they've announced that this is the new world order. Well, Bush has announced that. They've been doing that for a long time. But at this minute, what they're doing now is loaning more money throughout the world. In the problem that they have, the International Monetary Fund, and I happen to have their accounting book, in their International Monetary Fund book itself, the first thing that I want to know what they're talking about, and that is the definition of money, because we have to have some kind of guidelines to go on. Well, they don't have one. They flat out cannot tell you what money's like. And so when they come back today and tell you they've made special arrangements with our banks over here to mark to the market, they're just creating artificial figures out of thin air, and that's what I've been warning about a long time. And that was in the derivative market, that is running on the credit card scams across the United States right now, and the rest of the if you want to call it the pure Ponzi game, which is the stock market, which has no bearing on business whatsoever. That's merely people gambling out here. And most people are gambling with their retirement funds, and that's the reason why they've gone down 40 to 60% in the last few months.
I think it's real important, George, that people understand that these measures of, like the Fed buying up $1 trillion of debt from the Treasury, these are desperate moves and scrambles. And there's a looting going on, but it's also a desperate move showing that, this stuff, in this these numbers, you just can't keep doing it forever. There's going to be a point where they just can't do it anymore, and we have hyperinflation. So real briefly, Bill, if we can show those slides of kind of like what we're looking at here. First of all, picture $100. And we have a graphic here of basically what $100 looks like. And a lot of people are out of touch with actually how much a trillion is. Well, we'll show you in just a sec. Now we've got $10,000 after that. A nice little bundle of money. Have a great time in Vegas. It's worth worth a little bit, you know, some decadent fun there. Now you got about $100 million after that, just to get you to visualize and see how much this is. Here's $100 million. Now we're going to look at $1 billion. It's B with a boy. That's $1 billion. So when you hear about trillions, well, we're looking at this. Those pellets are double stacked. George, your comments. I mean, big numbers being thrown out here. I think most people just can't comprehend $1 trillion anymore and what that means.
No, and you really can't, because they're really not identifiable. I mean, $1 billion is 10,000 $100,000 homes. So we get an idea how much that is. The trouble is it's all created artificial, that they're using something we call money or dollars, as you mentioned, in order to keep track of the exchange of goods and services. And right now, nobody knows what anything is worth. Everybody is very insecure at this minute. They're no longer spending, and that's what economy is all about. And if you really look at the whole world situation, all of the area throughout the whole world, or the consumer people, are just basically collapsing around every place. Everybody they're laying off, even in India and in China. China just laid off, they closed down 14 of their refineries. Now you have to understand, China's, in population basis, is over 4 times the population of the United States. And yet they're a consumer society, and they're consuming all the goods in the world that they can finally get based on the dollar that we've given them. So we may owe them $1.2 trillion when you're using your numbers. That's the American taxpayer that has to do it, but the American taxpayer is gone. We no longer have a tax base because we don't have people working. And just like the figures that you mentioned a little while ago, the figures of the unemployment are only those people that are working, that are not working, but are drawing unemployment benefits. After the benefits are used up, they're no longer on the rolls.
Exactly.
So we're really looking.
They say Oregon's like 10.8 unemployment now, but it's probably more like 15 to 20. They're only counting people still on paper as seeking a job or something along those lines. There's a lot of people lose jobs that never go to the unemployment office.
That's exactly correct. And then they also talk to you about the inflation rate, which I figure it's around 14 or 15% too. So when they tell you to go put your money in the bank or treasuries that are yielding 2 or 3%, you're really going in the whole 18%. Because you have to be buying goods at a higher price. You just go down to any supermarket and look at the Cheerio boxes, for instance. They're 20% less in size right now, but the price hasn't gone down.
Exactly. It's all getting smaller. Even the hamburger helper little boxes, a lot of people buy. They've gone down about, I would say, 30% in size. I was looking at it walking down the aisle, and everything's gotten smaller. It's the same price, but the ounces. It's reduced by about 30-40% in some cases.
Well, and that's what we're trying to. What you're trying to do, as the rest of us, is trying to get people to start looking at things. But most people are asleep. They don't realize what's happening to them. It's the old story: taking the frog and put it in a cold jar, and then heating up the jar. The frog will stay in there until it starts boiling, and then by that time they're dead. Well, we know. The Global 2000 agenda right now is to get a war started. I mean, I said it's called the Plan 2000.
Uh-huh.
And the number one problem, as Kissinger says, is we have too many people on the planet. And most people will recognize that there's about 6.8 billion, increasing over 200,000 a day. And there's not enough resources in the world to take care of it. Forget the carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide malarkey. That has nothing to do with it. And our plants absorb carbon dioxide. They want it, so they can give out oxygen. It's all the other pollutants and radiation that we're putting in the air that's causing all the problems with the earth, weather changes, the commotions are doing with ELF, and everything is affecting all of the planet. We're doing it to ourselves at this minute. We're also reaching a point in the universe we're going to have major changes, and this is more earthquakes and more volcanoes, like the one that just went off in Alaska. This is going to be escalating over the next 24 or 36 months, so they're going to be going everywhere, so everybody's going to be in chaos, and the only thing they're going to do is go to their local leader, if they can find it, and then they're going to have to register, because there's going to be some kind of emergency Obama's going to have to do. And then you'll go to your post office and register, and under the FEMA rules, or Federal Emergency Management Agency, you'll basically be taken to one of those prisoner of war camps that you're talking about, FEMA camp, They asked me to actually build one, and it says enemy prisoner of war camp. That's what the contract said. I don't know who the enemy is, Alex.
I want to mention briefly some of the stuff that we're seeing on Fox. You know, I mentioned Glenn Beck, but then there's Hannity, and we all know about his experience as a propaganda minister for the government. Well, in a very recent Fox segment, former Clintonite Dick Morris tells Sean Hannity that the globalists will put the American economy under international regulation, and those people who have been yelling, oh, the UN is going to take over, they've been crazy, but now they're right. Those conspiracy people, Sean Hannity interjects, and I really should have brought this video, had suggested that for years, those conspiracy people, you're not wrong, he concludes. And Dick continued on, it's the international regulation of financial institutions we have to worry about. It will happen under IMF control. Remember, the IMF is run by the Europeans and backed by the Americans. So, George, we all agree with that statement to a certain degree, but what is your take on why Fox is trying to paint itself as a provider of information about the New World Order?
Well, you've got to put some information or put the truth out there in certain places so people will go to what they want to. It's like CNN for a long time was giving out good information. The networks are all closing down. You're aware of that, ABC. It's going to take away the free speech very shortly. There are certain bills that they're trying to get at all the talk radio programs, i.e. ones that give alternative views like yourself, getting rid of the free speech amendment, and basically have it organized. Now, the New World Order, as you and I both know, is a socialist dictatorship, which is going to be controlled by others outside of it. Now we're talking about, and I'm telling everybody about the IMF, and believe it or not, just call the United Nations and ask them for the accounting book. It's called Systems of National Accounting. And it's the accounting book for the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. And you'll see exactly how they got control. How does most people even aware that the Federal Reserve, and I'm finding this even at the local banks, haven't got a clue that it's it's a corporation controlled by other people, and the monopoly game, they control of the money, it's all in the inner circle right now, and we're getting ready to collapse the whole United States, period, economically, so we can begin a war. We got to have what I call a diversion of all these things. The money is one thing. People are running in the streets is another. But if we can get everybody against some kind of a war going, so I watch the Middle East, because that's their biblical prophecy. They got to get a war started in Israel or thereabouts, so all of the rest of the people can follow in line, and that'll begin World War III as part of their population reduction. Out of that, you'll end up with the one world order, one World Bank, and one, they're going to be saved. IGA, we'll give you an insurance policy. I'll give you an insurance policy on your health. Nobody wants to take responsibility for anything, Alex.
So you're looking at a stage war as well. It's going to usher in this new world order, correct, involving China, Russia, and the United States, and perhaps other countries?
Exactly. This is all beginning. What do you think China did today? China just got to saying that they're going to issue a new exchange fund over there because they want to get paid in their currency. Right. And they don't want the dollar anymore either. So, but they're willing to work out a three-way party on this thing. I have some friends here in the United States that import from China, like most people do, but now they have to pay them in anything besides the dollar. So they either have to buy the Canadian dollars and try to get an American cannot go to Canada to open up a bank account now. Did you know that?
I have.
Just to get United.
Yeah. It's insane.
And in Panama right now, which is another location where a lot of people have gone money down there, my friends, they're in a banking deal now. Homeland Security isn't going over every account right now. You can't wire $5,000 back to the United States because they'll sit down and say, where did you get it from? Prove it, and you're going to be a terrorist or a druggie. So you're just basically locking your money up in some of the foreign accounts.
Yeah.
Right now, the best thing you can do is get gold and silver and get physical possession. Don't buy anything on the market that's manipulated because the whole stock market's manipulated. First of all, North Korea, as we know, has 5 nuclear warheads right now. This is just get everybody all wound up. The chairman of China told, our leaders over here, you don't know how many nuclear bombs we have. Today they're talking about, 2,000 and 1,000 that the Russians have. Russians have 20,000 nuclear warheads. We have about 10,000. I mean, you can look it up on the internet. It is there. So when they talk about these small figures, that is their goal that they were going to have that was set up by the last treaty that they had. But then when we started attacking Iraq, and Iraq was all their nuclear stuff was all being Russian. Iran is all Russian right now with their nuclear stuff, and the Russians have pulled all their nuclear scientists out of southern Iran right now because they have all the nuclear reactors and things there, because they can see what's coming up, getting a nuclear war started. Syria has the nuclear bombs. They're all over the place. And who's their enemy right now is Israel, which is basically an interesting situation because they want to follow the biblical prophecies to get this thing going. And Israel, I'm telling anybody, if you see a nuclear bomb hit Israel in the next few months, and I think it could happen, that's going to begin World War III. Because by the nature of everything, if we hit Israel, that's automatically a declaration of war against the United States, and we'll respond in kind. Is that what they're going after Iran, which in turn brings in Russia, and Russia has nuclear submarines on both coasts of the United States and floating platforms, they call them cosmospheres, over the United States, prepared for all this thing for the population reduction program, which they've already put up a monument for it, Alex. This is down in Georgia. It's called the Georgia Guidestones. They're only expecting 20 million Americans to be left alive on this debacle. Now, as you're watching the money play, that's just to get everybody confused. They don't really care. They got the New World Cash Card. They got the chips ready. I do have some good news for people. If you don't want to have their satellites or anything else look in your house, go out and buy some lead paint and paint it on the walls on the inside. And you can get lead paint. They use it on the bottom of boats. And it's not poisonous. Forget the malarkey they told us before. But you can't, the radiation and everything else will be protected by the lead paint. Think about that.
All right, George, I want to ask you something else about all this stuff. Now, we're talking about the New World Order, and you mentioned Iran. Ahmadinejad has mentioned that we need a New World Order as well. I wonder why. Are they jockeying for position of those that could benefit from the new emerging order that's building up more steam in the East, or are they all just working together saying the same thing, New World Order, New World Order, New World Order, New World Order? Your take on why Iran says New World Order, like three articles I found calling for it.
Well, here's the problem. If I travel around the world, and if you can get your stuff on an airplane and fly over to Iran right now and go into the supermarkets, they're just like ours. They're loaded with product, even the Cheerios and the rest of the stuff that you have. So that the play that we're being given that these are bad guys up there doing it, they really don't care. When they recognize, because they're taking oil out of the ground and they're running that critical area, there's not enough oil, they want to have energy. So what they have done is set up in a process to reprocess. This is what they want to do, reprocess the nuclear waste. The United States doesn't do that. France does, Russia does, and Iran wants to do that. That was the basis of their reactors that the Russians already put in there. So what we're looking at, they know that they're going to be siding with Russia, and rest assured, it's the old Communist Manifesto which says, feign weakness as we go strong. Mm-hmm. And rest assured, they're there. The Russian space program is a lot higher than ours, or farther ahead than ours. I know their nuclear program's about 10 years ahead of us. They have more billionaires in Moscow than any other city in the world. And that's based with, the information from Forbes magazine. So the money games and everything else that's playing on, what the propaganda they get down here, just look at the things and don't believe it or research everything yourself. The bad thing that they have going right now, the Internet, can give you all kinds of information and you can sort it through, get with other people to support each other, get your own food stored up right now. I'm recommending that pretty heavily. Water, if you can, get away from major cities, because things are going to be really drastically going in the next few months.
All right, I want to get you to elaborate on that. We're briefly going to show, Christy, let's actually do track 2 instead. We're seeing more protests around the world, and looking back the last couple of years, we see a lot of weird situations happen where we see protests turn violent, where we see a small segment start up the violence, and it looks like this is a ploy by the part of intelligence agencies working in cohorts with the police in some cases to plant agent provocateurs, to start something violent so they can crack down on all the peaceful protesters and make it look like it's necessary. So we're going to show you track 2 from this particular DVD, and all this is from yesterday. And then we'll come back and talk more to George. But you're going to see what I'm talking about here in this video. Go ahead and roll it, and I'm going to kind of narrate over it. If this is track 2, then perhaps I meant track 5. Try track 5. That was it. That's it. Right there. Okay, I want you guys to look at the guy in the middle of the screen.
I'm still here, if you can hear me.
Yeah, we're just watching this at the very meeting point between one line of police and the protesters. There was a great surge from the back, but this seems to be the ringleader at the moment. Very
See how none of the cops even touch the guy. They don't even touch him. He's right in their face. He's kicking. He's screaming. And you see this guy. Oh, here comes the guy with the stick. He emerges. You know, something very suspicious about some of the stuff we're seeing at protests. And then after things like this, you end up seeing people get their ass beat.
The line that they're trying to create is being threatened in any way.
There's another protester has emerged with a very long pole of some description. There goes a smoke bomb.
Now look here, he grabs him. He grabs him. And he easily gets away though and slips back into the crowd right after this. Like a ninja. Yeah, he was just quick. Yeah.
Police officer
and they're just standing there.
A police officer has just been struck very forcibly by that protester. He's more than a protester with that long pole, and we can see the officer being taken aside.
A cop gets assaulted, but the guy gets away. But they end up going after the girls and the ladies, and you see plenty of them getting hit upside the head with a shield. So George, it seems like they just want an angry population. We've got violence all over the TV set. We've got World Wrestling. We've got all this stuff. But do you think people are actually intelligently prepared to create real change, or do you think they're just trying to whip up an angry mob so they can have the pretext to just drop the baton on the head?
Well, the problem is that those things that you're showing right now are happening all over the globe. And you can go isolated to one of them saying that's only happening there, but they don't tell you about the stuff that's happening all over the continent of Africa. They're happening even in Australia in the cities, Latin America, that go to Venezuela, all these different places of all kinds of riots that are not only just happening against the current regimes that are involved into it, but people are starving to death all over the world, and they're starting to get ready to get organized, and that's the reason why they got to get this war started again.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think it's all agent provocateur use, by the way. I just think there might be some elements there going on in some of these protests, but certainly we're looking at a lot more on the table coming up, as you said, by this summer. And so we're going to see more rioting. So what do you think is going to be transpiring in the next couple months? I know a lot of people are talking about the next couple months being highly significant in ways that most people have no comprehension.
Well, I happen to have one of my friends as a state representative, and he said within 6 months you will not recognize the dollar. That's telling me that what they're doing right now, because the rest of the world's not going along with just borrowing debt or creating things, and laying off, people are being laid off all around the planet, Alex. So it isn't a question of just the United States. We just happen to be a focal point because we've exported all of our jobs. Even IBM is just telling people they're laying off 5,000 more people and going off to India, to acquire them. So we can no longer keep the system going that we have, and that's another one of the reasons why we're going to be looking at all this total chaos. And what can I tell you? Go to my website, nohoax.com, and read the special message for you. And if that happens to, register with you, then you'll get more information from our website. And that's nohoax.com, Nohoax.
Events, they were so lucid and they were so real that it was almost like going through the experience. And I literally just begged God, stop it, because I couldn't tell time. I didn't know when these things were going to happen. At that time, an alliance between Russia and China was unheard of, and so I had no way of gauging when these events were going to happen, and they were pretty scary to me, so I managed to just block them out until 9/11. Then when 9/11 happened, that was kind of one of the first things that, I mean, that's really when World War III started. I think that's what a lot of people already say that, and people that would look back in time would say that that's when World War III started. And that was something that I saw in those visions. And now recently, everything that Putin has been doing and the way the new president has been put up and Putin steps back but still retains power, and just all his threats and all that stuff was stuff that I saw a long time ago. And it's very concerning. It's quite frightening. You know, I want to reiterate that there is a happy ending to all of this. So even though we're going to go into detail of some doom and gloom type stuff, there is a happy ending, and there is a way to be able to navigate all of this without losing yourself to post-traumatic stress, or, I mean, that's how serious for Americans things can possibly get. And so I think for us Americans, what we're going to start to see is, I mean, we're already hearing the rhetoric and we're seeing the posturing between the East and the West, and we'll continue to hear that as time goes on. But then we're going to start to see natural disasters in our country, so we're going to be gripped by the television watching things happening on the West Coast, like earthquakes in the Bay Area. You guys have a volcano in Seattle and earthquakes in San Diego. So there's going to be a lot of activity in a very short period of time that's going to have all of America gripped to the television.
We had some anti-terror drills here in Portland that you may have heard about or read about, Top Off 4. And this was taking place as they had war games across the sea. Shortly after the announcement of the joint military drills between China and Russia under the SCO, and that wasn't even in the press as part of why perhaps we were engaged in those drills in Portland, Oregon, in Guam, and Phoenix.
Yeah, well, that's why I say we're looking at some real serious posturing going on here. Even the satellite that was allegedly falling out of orbit and us having to shoot that down is really just, that's us kind of reacting to China and Russia and letting them know that if you mess with us, we can play these games too, because we already know that China can do that. And again, to me, that's alarming when you see that kind of behavior going off. But, you know, most Americans, I can't really say why most of us aren't going to know. I mean, obviously the people listening to you are going to know, but most people aren't going to know what's going on, and I can't really say why that is. There's so many channels that we can flip through, and some of us don't like to watch the news, and we're just not aware that there's a missile defense shield, and there's these things that are going on in the world, and that's why they want to blow us up. And the Chinese is they see very old people and very old ways of thinking. So I see very old communist ways of handling things and very old plans. And I think the Chinese and the Russians especially, have probably been planning this ever since they lost World War II. I mean, at least some divisions of Russian generals have been off, you know, figuring what they can do, and the plans have maybe gotten quite dramatic and often patient. That's why I can say, you know, breathe easy for the next year more than likely, because they're very patient. You know, they need to build that case up, and they've been very patient since 9/11 and allowed America to basically make an ass of itself across the world, so that when they do attack us, they can be the heroes and they can justify their reasons for attacking us. I don't like to even talk about or even post on the internet, but you know, as far as the Middle East is concerned, and I mean, America's not going to say anything about that because they don't want to threaten us. That's why they're not going to tell us this satellite deal is part of the missile shield and part of letting China and Russia know that they'll knock their satellites out if they dare attack us as well. I mean, that's too scary to talk about. That's why we need people like you, so that we can talk about this stuff. But they're not going to admit to that kind of thing.
What else do you see about that same time that the Chinese take the West Coast?
Well, I see it starting with a missile attack. I just see us one day as Americans waking up and seeing that we're being bombarded by conventional missiles, especially on the East Coast in Washington, D.C. And I see these missile attacks as very precise and hitting government installations. I see it being very clean. I see it scaring us, and especially people that live along the East Coast, and so they're all packing up their cars and driving and flooding the highways. We already have a mass exodus that's going on from the West Coast, and we also have like FEMA and our troops on the West Coast because of the disasters and everything that's going on there. So it's kind of the beginning, and I think they're just going to watch us fall apart internally before the troops actually come in, because the troops are going to be called quote-unquote peacekeepers, and they'll be Russian-led, but most of the troops will be Chinese, so it'll be both Russians and Chinese coming in, and they'll be coming up to Americans saying, you know, our way is a better way. They have a plan, and if you follow our way, everything will be good for you, and it will be. You know, they'll take you in and they'll give you a little implant in your hand that'll have cash value that you can build your new life with, and so it'll be very seductive and it'll seem very, very peaceful to some people. Of course, other people aren't going to go for that, especially people that are going to, you know, see that as a mark of the beast and a scary anti-Christian thing to do. And they'll be in for it. They'll go into the prison camps. They'll get the retinal eye scanners to ID who they are and in their system, and just keep them locked up. And again, those are the states that I mentioned that I wouldn't want to be in: California and Oregon and Washington.
Yeah. In the meantime, where do you see our government?
Fighting really hard. I mean, first they're going to withdraw from overseas, so they're going to withdraw from the Middle East. There is this policy that's going to be out there about nuclear weapons, because people think MAD is what keeps this from happening, but Russia has been saying and China has been saying for a while now, and they'll make it quite clear when they declare war on America, that if the first country that uses a nuke in this war will receive the entire stockpile of Russia and China right back in response. And so nobody's going to want to do that. So they'll withdraw completely out of the Middle East except for Israel, and they'll want Israel to use one of their nukes to help deal with what's going on in there. But our troops are going to come home to defend the homeland, and they're going to set up along the Rocky Mountains, and that's why I don't see them getting any farther. They're getting into California and Nevada, but they're not getting much past that. And that's because our boys, not only the people that are trained, but even armed civilians are fighting back, and I never really see them winning. I just see this gruesome aspect in California and states like that. And I also see a gruesome aspect along the Mississippi River from our own evils as Americans. There are some greedy, evil Americans out there, and they're going to congregate along the Mississippi River Valley for whatever reason and be violent on each other. And so there is this safe zone along the Rocky Mountains, and it's just east of the Rocky Mountains where the good people are, where the fighters are there, the fathers with guns who are willing to protect their wives, and all the people that are kind of being gathered together by the Creator, basically, for the next step, for what happens after this war. Because really what's going to end this war is an act of God. It's not a man's thing. That's why I can use the term Antichrist, because I use that term as a man who thinks his way is the best way, a human way of creating the world, or a person who thinks that they have the solution. So, you know, that's what Hitler was doing. He had the ideal world that he wanted to go and create, and that was a man ego-based concept that had nothing to do with the Creator. And so the final Antichrist, this final Russian leader that comes up and starts this strike and then gains power from it, and is going to seduce the rest of the world. I mean, us Americans are going to suffer, but for 3.5 years, the rest of the world is just going to sit back and let us take it.
You mentioned that these things would happen, after our own country comes down a couple notches. What do you see in regards to that, knowing what we know about the UN saying that they may have to provide the United States with food rations if the economy implodes? We see a lot of people in the economic elite in our own country, in the global marketplace, getting their money out of the United States. Where do you see America in the next year economically?
The only thing I can first of all, I'm not a banker. I could care less about money. But what will happen is when our economy starts to negatively impact the international community, that's when you're going to find Russia coming forward and blaming and using those kinds of scenarios, which they're already doing, to make us the enemy, that our way of us forcing our way into other countries and into other systems and into other worlds is how they're going to get us.
So what you're saying is this can come as a total shock. Life can be going on as usual. You're talking about the television sets reporting the chaos from the natural disasters prior to the invasion. So you're saying there'll be a somewhat of a level of stability prior to that.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, things will get bad and things will get worse in those terms. You know, the natural disasters are going to have an economic impact. Losing San Francisco, there's no way you can't have a massive economic impact from losing San Francisco. So those things are going to happen, but I don't see it as like this kind of crisis. The crisis is the day the missiles start to shower down, and that's the day we lose power, and that's the day we're now having to cook on open fires. That's the day where we lose being America. That's the day where America falls in an hour. People either losing their homes or money's not working. Things that used to work just aren't working anymore, and it feels like the end of the world. It's really just an old way of existing falling apart. But it's happening to us individually, but it's starting to show itself in the greater scope of it, the planet. So, you know, the biggest problem are people being unconscious to this, not being aware of it. I remember specifically when war breaks out on American soil, Americans don't believe war could ever happen here. They've never seen it other than a civil war. Our generations don't even know what that's like unless they've joined the military and gone and been involved in war. People at home here don't really know what that's like, and I distinctly recall that no one had any idea who was shooting at us. Missiles start showering down on the East Coast, hitting government installations. People start flipping out, see this on TV, and they don't even understand the world enough to understand who's attacking us and why they're attacking us.
Okay, you mentioned Russia being involved in this. In the past interviews, you mentioned the East Coast primarily, where the Russians were coming in. I'm sure Alaska is going to be a hot spot as well. What cities do you think are going to be most at risk, and where do you see some of the potential safe areas?
Well, you know, I want to say there's the war stuff that I've seen, there's a lot of safe things. There's rules of nuclear war, and there's only 3 countries that are going to use nuclear weapons, and America is not one of them. So there's never going to be a nuclear detonation. I know people have had visions of that. That's why I mentioned me also having visions of that in New York. Well, there was a terrorist explosion, but in a dream, it was told more of a story to see this nuclear, the most scariest kind of explosion that triggers the world into a new cycle of advancement. So I know lots of people out there listening have had visions of nuclear wars, but I've had visions that specifically address that and clearly say that there's rules of war. And the Chinese have already let us know that. I mean, the Chinese have let the Americans know that if they're ever engaged in a conflict, they'll have no other choice but to nuke 200 U.S. cities if it comes down to it. So it sticks to conventional weaponry. Nuclear weapons get involved when the war moves from America over to the Middle East as Russia comes through Syria to try to get democracy and get out Israel out of there. And that's when Israel fires off one preemptive nuclear weapon, and Russia and China both respond to that with their promises of carpet bombing any country that dares set off one nuke. It's too much of a risk. So it's not mutually assured destruction that's keeping them from doing it. It's basically here's the rules. And so that's pretty safe, in my opinion, for Americans. Don't have to really worry about that. And also the missile strikes from Russia in the East Coast were very targeted. They had very advanced weapons that could focus in and blow up a government building on a block that also had civilian apartments, for example, on the same block, and just take out the government installation and cause very minimal harm. So most of those strikes are all military strikes along the East Coast. The chaos comes from people waking up that day and turning on the TV or hearing the radio, and people running in the streets and you know, going kind of postal. And the Chinese will be offering us things: money, part of a new financial system, freedom from the fear that everyone will have been in after a couple of years of war. But they're never really going to take over. So as they invade through California and Oregon and Washington and start to make their way to the Rockies, America is an armed country.
Right.
And I don't mean our military is armed. Our civilian population is armed. And they're never really going to be able to successfully do that. But they will be able to occupy parts of the West Coast. And that's where you'll see concentration camps. That's where you'll be seeing people, Americans, being given a choice. Do you want to take this new financial system? And this is where you're going to see the mark of the beast. Do you want a little implant that'll have $100,000 for you to start your brand new life with if you just agree to come to this new world order? And some people will do that. Some people will be in so much fear and terror that they'll just accept anything. And some people won't, and those people will get thrown into concentration camps. And people in Europe and people in Africa and people that are watching stuff on TV, they're going to be seeing the happy Americans coming out with the Chinese for this new world order of sharing the wealth with everyone. They're not going to see the concentration camps where Americans, especially Christian Americans, who refuse to take something like a microchip in their
They will
hands.
show them what they want to show them, especially when China has more control over the U.S. media.
Right. And then once you're in the concentration camp, they'll retinal scan you for, you know, just like your tag mark, and it's horrifying.
In light of what we had seen in the past, when we know what happens when war takes place, when people are not ready, how big of a factor do you see human trafficking being a problem, specifically trafficking of women to locations outside the United States? How strong of a threat do you think this is?
It's a huge, 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 massive threat. It's not even a threat against enemies of Americans. It's a threat against fellow Americans. So you have to realize, as America, we're going to be sitting here, and sure, an earthquake might pop off over there, or some thunderstorms rip up some stuff over here, but we're still going to stick around. The moment of collapse, especially if it's from missiles falling down, whatever it is, the moment of collapse, that's when people go crazy. We're really addicted to our realities, our money, our cars, our things. If you lose all of that and you're running and abandoning the cities and cars with family or by yourself, there's a level of stress involved that most people don't have a clue about. And people will develop post-traumatic stress. People will see opportunities to steal from one another. People that haven't had for most of their lives will loot and rape and take and steal.
Right.
And in fact, as I recall, the Antichrist, who his chant when I had a vision of him was, give to yourself, above all else, give to yourself. And that's partly what brings the world into chaos, people taking what they want from another. So Americans are their own threat, especially from the East Coast. And I've specifically seen along the Mississippi River Valley is kind of where a lot of those gangs form, kind of like, you know, Mad Max.
So, Matthew, explain to us which is more threatening, the EMP situation or scenario or the solar flare?
Well, I'm personally a lot more worried about solar flares. They're both really, really serious, and I'll explain the differences. Now, so a solar flare does not destroy your personal electronics like an EMP does. So an EMP is this electromagnetic pulse that goes, you know, when a nuclear bomb blows off above the planet Earth, it generates this charged particle event in the upper atmosphere. But there's three effects from an EMP, and there's really only one effect from the solar storm. So with an EMP, you have an E1 effect, and that's like a speed of light, like nanoseconds, fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a second. It's just like, psh. And what that effect is like, it's like going and rubbing your feet on the carpet on a cold winter's day and opening up your computer cabinets and putting your fingers in there and sparking a bunch of chips and saying, gee, I wonder what that did. So the EMP effect is like inducing these little electrostatic events like all over in the zone. And to get an idea of how big an effective area, if you have a large nuclear device that's blown off, say, like 70 miles above planet Earth, it's going to affect an area of, say, roughly a 1,500-mile circle. We've got a good graphic for that. Now, how big is that? Well, draw a circle on your map that goes through Quebec, Canada, and goes to Miami Beach, Florida. And so that'll cover most of Texas. It'll cover the entire eastern seaboard of the United States. It'll cover Chicago. It'll cover like 3/4 of the population of the country. And it'll cover, and what will it do within that effect? Well, the E1 effect is going to go out, and it's going to cause electrostatic effects that destroy most of the complex, digitally controlled electrical systems in our country. Now, your iPhone, probably going to be okay. It's just a discrete little component. It's got no big antenna. It's probably going to be fine. Your cars, surprisingly enough, in actual EMP tests done by the US DoD, roughly 15%, 1 out of 8 of the cars driving down the road will just stop dead. They'll stop. That's only 1 out of 8. Most of the cars will have some kind of electronic anomalies and things. But you see, a car is designed to be quite resistant to static kind of things. See, cars are discrete. They got rubber tires. They're self-contained. They're insulated. And they've got sparky things going on inside of cars all the time anyway. So they're fairly hardened from an EMP point of view. Now, but here's the downside. Pretty much in EMP tests, every electronic digital control system that's connected with wiring of any kind, like network cords, like all of the stuff that runs our factories, all of our stuff that runs our refineries, all of our stuff that runs the internet, all of our stuff that runs the phone systems, all of our stuff that treats our water, all of our stuff that air conditions our air, all of our stuff that makes our world go round, that's going to die. All the complex digital control systems, the digital logic controllers, the DLCs, the programmable logic controllers, the PLCs, and all of the remote SCADAs, sensory control and data acquisition systems that are the remote eyes and ears that run our nuclear power plants. Like, little guys in suits can't go inside the nuclear power plant and make it work inside the reactor itself. It's all done remotely. So all of those complex digital systems that make the stuff in our world go around, that's toast. It's done. Now, the problem is, not only is that done, the guys who still know how to repair things manually and diagnose things manually, most of them are dinosaurs. Like, they got gray hair like me and bald heads, and they're old guys and they're retired. And so nowadays, everything's diagnosed remotely via the internet, and the computers are figuring it out. Well, try to fix that stuff when there is no internet, when all the computer systems are fried, when all that stuff is down. Try to control a nuclear power plant. 3 Mile Island burned down on a sunny day when there was no solar storm and nothing happened. They had a partial meltdown. And it was just some weird control system anomaly in the cooling system, and the guys in the control center didn't see it for 15 minutes. It started up, and for 15 minutes they didn't know what was going on. Well, for 3 days they did not know if 3 Mile Island was going to totally melt down and become a Chernobyl or Fukushima. They didn't know that. It was only after 3 days they realized that they felt comfortable, it was stabilized enough that they'd survived a partial meltdown. The whole thing is ruined. It was all toast. It's never going to work again. But at least it didn't blow up and blow its top like Fukushima and Chernobyl did. So now, imagine now, in the United States, if you look at the map, and we've got the graphic showing it, you've got 38% of the population of the United States lives within 50 miles of a nuclear reactor. 38%, that's more than 1 out of every 3 Americans lives within 50 miles of a nuclear reactor. And you say, well, why do they do that? Well, it costs money to transmit energy long distances. You know, if you look at the map, the East Coast is where it's densely populated, and it's where we have the dense population of nuclear power plants. So we have nuclear power plants, you know, all around the big fault line in the East Coast. What's the name of that? The New Madrid Fault. You know, we've got power plants all up and down the New Madrid Fault. We've got power plants all up and down the East Coast. So in the event of an EMP, if it's a large EMP, you're talking that 1,500-mile circle, you're gonna do about 80% of the nuclear power plants in the United States are probably going to go into failure mode right away.
Now, I do not believe that nations fall economically. And nations who lose their moral compass, nations who become fat, dumb, and happy and ignorant through a controlled press, and get bore-sighted on the false economic solutions that are presented before them, ended up missing the great threat that's looming up behind their back, which ends up being war. And World War III is what the powers that be in this country will use to eliminate this debt. It's obvious they're spending with abandon. There's no way to pay off this debt. The total American indebtedness is over $50 trillion, counting all obligations that they owe, pension funds and all of the guarantees and the loans, over $50 trillion. Put it this way, the big threat is not economic. It's going to be hard, and we're not at the bottom yet. But I'll tell you, the big threat comes when a nuclear preemptive strike, even an EMP strike alone, would take this country down for a year to less than a third world country. And I'll tell you, all commerce stops once an EMP strike happens because the computers are fried. What's that going to do? It means instant social unrest. The grocery store shelves are cleared out. People are panicking, and people start to pillage. Even good people are forced to pillage because they have no choice. That's the big problem. Even though Portland is not a nuclear target, Portland is not, it's a safe area in that. In fact, most of the Oregon coast, clear down through the south, is safe from nuclear weapons, except for a residual fallout that may come from Japan. The problem is being able to survive pillaging and panic, even among good people who just have not prepared.